Marvel. Start with Betty Ross as my girlfriend. Chapter 21. Please have a seat, General. Joe Young seemed not at all surprised by Deputy Director Ross's visit. He enthusiastically invited him to sit down, personally poured him a cup of tea, and then sat opposite him, saying, "This is Mingqian Longjing tea from China, quite precious, at least very hard to get in New York." Oh. Deputy Director Ross saw Joe Young looking completely at ease, as if he had long anticipated his arrival. Therefore, with seasoned shrewdness, he didn't immediately jump into the main topic. Instead, while tasting the Longjing tea in his hand, he casually looked at the furnishings in the room and said, "Your decor here seems a bit old-fashioned." "You are quite direct, General." Joe Young couldn't help but be slightly taken aback. Deputy Director Ross, as a military politician, was indeed different from those who mingled in the secular political world. If it were them, they might have described Joe Yang's place as something like classical elegance. But then again, even if those people were to cater and flatter, they would only do so towards those with greater power, not towards a nobody like Joe Young. "Actually, it's nothing much. I haven't been here for more than 3 days in total and haven't contacted anyone for interior decoration yet." Joe Young glanced at the furnishings in the room again, then turned back and said with a smile, "But there's no rush. I'll be living here for at least 4 years, and if I get a master's or doctoral degree, I might stay even longer. I should really fix it up properly." "Are you really just here to study?" Hearing Joe Young say this, Deputy Director Ross felt a pang of doubt. Could it be that the magician he had previously seen displaying great power on the Imperial University campus was not Joe Young? "I know what you're thinking, but that's not the case at all." Joe Young picked up the teapot in his hand, continued to pour a cup of tea for Deputy Director Ross, and then went on to say, "You might already know that I know a little magic, but you may have completely misunderstood magicians." Oh. Deputy Director Ross became serious. The reason he was targeting Joe Young was precisely because of the magic power Joe Young had demonstrated. Whether it was capturing him and forcing him to work for him, or using other legal and legitimate means to entice him into cooperation, all of this was predicated on his magic power being replicable. However, if such power could not be applied to others, then his value would be greatly reduced. Hundreds of years ago, a powerful magician could directly decide the outcome of a war, but in the last 100 years, the power that magicians can exert has decreased day by day. In recent years, it's even rare to hear of new magicians appearing. The most important reason for this is that the magic elements on Earth have become increasingly inert, and the stronger the inertia, the more unfavorable it is for the casting of magic. Joe Young looked at Deputy Director Ross, who was listening intently with narrowed eyes, and continued, "There are actually quite a few people in this world like me who can only be called elementary magicians. However, it is very difficult for people like us to go any further. We even have to prepare for a long time before casting magic, and there are many limitations. That's why I've turned my attention to modern science. After all, everything in the world is composed of magic. A deep understanding of them is, in a sense, a deep understanding of magic. Perhaps I can find other magical paths through unconventional methods and by drawing parallels." Magic inertia. Deputy Director Ross keenly grasped the point in Joe Yang's words. Regarding Joe Yang's statement that everything in the world is composed of magic, he could actually understand it. It was just a difference in worldview, nothing majorly wrong. However, if the magic inertia on Earth was truly that strong, then even if he had some value, there might not be a valuable return after massive investment. Deputy Director Ross's mind was racing quickly. He would need to verify the accuracy of Joe Yang's words after returning. But if it was truly as Joe Yang said, then the abilities he possessed had no possibility of being widely promoted, which would greatly reduce his exploitable value. In that case, there would be no need to spend so much effort on him. However, on second thought, while he might lack that particular value, the power he possessed certainly made him someone who couldn't be easily ignored, especially in terms of fighting the Hulk. Perhaps another set of Thunderbolt plans could begin. The Thunderbolt plan was a project that the United States military had slowly begun to advance. The trigger was Tony Stark publicly revealing his Iron Man identity, and as more and more superheroes appeared throughout America, the United States military felt an even greater need to have its own superhero team. The fact that Blonsky was injected with the super soldier serum by Deputy Director Ross was an example in itself. Otherwise, even to deal with the Hulk, they wouldn't casually use up a bottle of highly valuable super soldier serum. It's just a shame that guy was still brainless. Although he was kicked by the Hulk and had all his bones shattered, he was still alive. But Deputy Director Ross was increasingly losing interest in him. Disobeying orders on the battlefield was something no soldier could accept. This project was one that the United States military prepared to implement, recruiting other superheroes for their use, after the Super Soldier program had made no real progress in various aspects, and spurred on by Tony Stark and S.H.I.E.L.D. And now, since Joe Yang's magic cannot be fully promoted, recruiting him to join the superhero team is not unacceptable. However, looking at his current stance, appearing intent on studying hard at Imperial University, he might not be willing to join the United States military's Thunderbolt plan. So that's how it is. Deputy Director Ross nodded with a standard politician's fake smile. As he picked up his teacup, he seemed to remind him with great concern, but you must also be careful. That monster from today might not let you off so easily. Be prepared. Facing Deputy Director Ross's seemingly veiled threat, Joe Yong smiled relaxed and said, he can certainly come here easily, but finding me isn't so simple. Look, General. As he spoke, Joe Yong waved his hand, and dots of blue magic phosphorescence scattered throughout the room. In the blink of an eye, Joe Yang's figure appeared in the kitchen on the first floor, the bedroom on the second floor, the attic on the third floor, and even more places. This scene left Deputy Director Ross stunned. In these years in Jotunheim, Joe Yong was actually unable to practice many types of magic. Therefore, he could only rely on Jotunheim's inherent icy chill to practice magic. Over a period of more than 70 years, he did the same thing every day for a considerable amount of time, compressing his memory of time to the shortest possible. Yet, even so, years of pure practice allowed him to achieve profound mastery in ice magic. He even successfully broke through to the realm of a legendary magician by using materials left behind by ancient wizard in Jotunheim. If he were on Jotunheim, the ice magic Joe Yong could unleash would be ever-changing and extraordinarily powerful. However, back on Earth, because the magic elements on Earth are too inert, even he finds it difficult to overcome this. But simply using ice mirror technique to cast some illusions is a very simple matter. And the scene before them was something he was learning from Loki. Deputy Director Ross was already stunned by what he saw. At this moment, he saw Joe Yong opposite him say with a hint of pride, "This is just the simplest illusion. Anyone smart enough, if they observe carefully, can distinguish the differences. But that monster, General, do you think he really has the intelligence to tell? What nonsense about smart people being able to distinguish the differences by observing carefully. I've been watching for a long time and haven't been able to tell which is real and which is fake." Deputy Director Ross muttered inwardly. Because right now, he couldn't even tell whether the Joe Yong in front of him was real or fake, which meant he was no different in intelligence from that monster, the Hulk. However, it was precisely because of this that Deputy Director Ross completely abandoned the idea of dealing with Joe Yong. This kind of person was far more strange and cunning than simple-minded monsters like the Hulk. If he made a mistake, the consequences could be very troublesome. Also, General, you may not be entirely clear, but the person living next door to my house is the chief of the 67th Precinct of the New York Police. If Dr. Banner really comes knocking, I can also seek help from the new Chief Stacy, as he is also an officially wanted fugitive. Joe Yong said, holding the teacup in his hand and glancing towards the next door. He hoped General Ross could fully understand the hidden meaning in his words. Hearing Joe Yong directly say the name of Chief Stacy, General Ross immediately understood the truthfulness of his words, because these things could be fully investigated with just a little effort. And he indeed understood the hidden meaning in Joe Yang's words, because Joe Yong was not talking about the Hulk, but Dr. Banner, Dr. Bruce Banner. It was obvious that Joe Yong also had some understanding of the Hulk's true identity. And if it was really Dr. Bruce Banner who came knocking, and the family next door was the New York police chief, even if just a precinct chief, it would be a troublesome matter once the truth was revealed. General Ross did not ask how Joe Yong knew that the Hulk was Dr. Bruce Banner. These matters were meaningless. After all, as long as his daughter Betty Ross spoke, Joe Yong could know many things. This guy is also a deep-minded scoundrel. Why does Betty only seem to know such scoundrels? It was impossible for the Hulk to find Joe Yang's home. Not to mention whether he had the brains for it. Just his huge size walking down the street would immediately attract countless people's attention, and the New York police or United States military who arrived afterwards would immediately deal with him. So even if someone came, it could only be Dr. Bruce Banner. Regardless, the United States military's secret experiments could not be exposed to the public eye. Even if it was just a mere police chief, he was involved in many things, and political matters were always very troublesome. Therefore, General Ross's previous implicit threat to Joe Young was actually completely useless. Before coming, General Ross had conducted a deep investigation into Joe Young. On one hand, it was to find out if there were deeper magic forces hidden behind him, and on the other hand, it was to investigate his related background, economy, politics, and many other aspects. If threatening didn't work, then naturally he had to win him over. In fact, before threatening, his first thought was to win him over, but what he could offer was nothing more than things like money and power. However, after investigation, he found that these things were unlikely to sway Joe Young. After investigation, General Ross found that the Joe Young family in the Netherlands was not simple. Although the family was quite low-key in the Netherlands, they had a deep relationship with the Netherlands government, and the family also had extensive connections in the financial world. Because they had suffered persecution during World War II, they also received a considerable economic compensation after the war, and thus became wealthy. But the real key was that they also had deep connections with the Jews. So starting from the aspect of tempting with money and power would not have a great effect. Therefore, General Ross came up and began to subtly threaten. But now that threatening didn't work, he could only use other methods to win him over. Although he himself was not very willing, this was actually a choice born out of no other options. This was true not only for himself but also for his daughter, Betty Ross. It's best if you can guarantee your own safety, but as for Betty. General Ross shook his head with some worry, even letting out a long sigh, and then said, even if the Hulk doesn't actively come looking for her, she might actively go looking for the Hulk. So I hope. General, you may not be entirely clear, but Betty and I have already broken up. The day she went to find that person in front of me, it meant that everything between us was over. Joe Young interrupted General Ross very directly and decisively, looking like he completely didn't want to get involved anymore. Hearing Joe Young say this, General Ross said with a face full of surprise, "Then why did you yesterday?" "That was entirely just passing by chance." Joe Young interrupted General Ross again, giving an unreasonable but plausible explanation. In fact, both of them were just acting. General Ross naturally knew that Joe Young and Betty Ross had broken up. With Bruce Banner appearing in front of Joe Young, how could he still be entangled with Betty Ross so ambiguously? Of course, they broke up decisively. However, saying they had completely broken up was not entirely accurate. Otherwise, he wouldn't have appeared on campus and saved people in time. So, in General Ross's opinion, there were still some ties between them that hadn't been completely severed. As for Joe Young, Betty Ross was one matter, and General Ross was another. He wanted to get closer to the United States military but didn't want to use the matter of Betty Ross as leverage. However, if General Ross wanted to connect through this matter, that was his business. Let's just say you broke up, that's not important. But at least you were friends, right? Or perhaps in the future, you might still be Betty's student. Even with just this connection, I ask you to help me look after her for the next few days. There's no problem with that, right? General Ross still managed to bring up the connection in a roundabout way. That's acceptable. Joe Young hesitated for a moment, finally nodded, and said reluctantly, "School starts in a few days. Before school starts, I can keep helping look after her." "That's good. I'll leave her to you for the next few days. I won't go over, she doesn't want to see me either." General Ross stood up and left very decisively, saying, "Let's leave this matter here for now. If you need anything, just contact me directly." On Joe Young's coffee table was a card left by General Ross. The card had his phone number on it, only the number, no name. Joe Young stood at the door, watching General Ross leave in the military vehicle. He knew in his heart that this matter would not end so easily. The Hulk would eventually come back, and it wouldn't take many days. In reality, General Ross also knew this. They already had an unspoken understanding of working together, but all of this would happen after the Hulk incident was over. Just as Joe Young was about to turn around and go inside, he saw Gwen Stacy peeking out from the door of the house next door. He smiled gently at her curious eyes, then turned around and returned to his room. Gwen was naturally very curious about Joe Young. On one hand, it was because he was a new neighbor who had just moved in, and on the other hand, it was because of the 3 military vehicles that appeared at the door. Wasn't he supposed to be a new international student who had just moved from the Netherlands? How did he suddenly get involved with the US military? Sitting in the car, General Ross was also pondering the attitude Jo Young had shown today. On this matter, they still had room for negotiation. If there was no basis for negotiation at all, then they wouldn't have talked for so long today. The key was that General Ross didn't accurately grasp what Jo Young wanted. And regarding these things, Jo Young didn't reveal a single word. At least it indicated that this person had considerable ambition. However, having considerable ambition was not a bad thing, at least he could be used by him. A Blonsky, a Jo Young. If the two of them really joined forces and got some good things from Stark Industries, dealing with the Hulk wouldn't be a very difficult matter. At least there would be some direction. The pressure from the White House and the Pentagon on him was considerable, and many people were even watching the show. What show were they watching? The battle that occurred on the Third Reich campus yesterday, whether it was Bruce Banner or Jo Young, was related to General Ross's daughter, Betty Ross. Some even joked that it was a battle between love rivals. An old lover, a new lover, plus the father, who was a lover from a past life, that was truly lively. Just then, General Ross's phone rang. He originally wanted to hang up casually, but in the end, he answered the call. Hello, General Ross, this is Nick Fury. Jo Young held a book on quantum physics in his hand, casually flipping through it in the Imperial University Library. After confirming it was what he needed, he placed it aside. There was already a stack of over 10 books there. The entire library was already packed with people, all busy with their own matters. Despite the unexpected major incident, the learning atmosphere at Imperial University was completely unaffected. Everything returned to normal the very next day, and most people didn't even know what truly happened the day before yesterday, thinking it was just a regular drill. Furthermore, even those who were sensitive or believed in conspiracy theories wouldn't speculate too seriously. After all, Imperial University is one of America's important research bases. Even Fantastic Four's Mr. Fantastic Reed and his old rival Dr. Doom graduated from Imperial University. So, the United States military personnel appearing on campus wasn't a rare occurrence. It wasn't even uncommon for more soldiers to be present, it usually just meant there was an issue with someone's experiment. Therefore, even though some rumors about yesterday's events leaked out, people were mostly speculating about what went wrong, and some even showed a hint of schadenfreude. Of course, not everyone was unaware of the details. Besides some of the school's higher-ups, there were a few students who witnessed everything firsthand, and some even recorded videos, although those videos were confiscated by the United States military personnel. Even if they had uploaded them online a step ahead, the prepared United States military technicians quickly deleted them completely. The United States military was well prepared to deal with Hulk, they had devised countless plans for before and after the event. However, they hadn't expected Hulk's strength to be so immense, so much so that even their trump card, the sonic cannon, couldn't handle Hulk. If Jo Young hadn't suddenly appeared at the end, they might really have had to deploy tanks and armored vehicles. If cannons were fired then, whether or not they could kill Hulk was one thing, but at the very least, this matter couldn't be concealed. So, many people were actually very curious about Jo Young's identity. It could even be said that if Deputy Director Ross hadn't approached him further and reached a basic cooperation agreement with Jo Young, then the New York Police Department, the Federal Bureau of Investigation, and SHIELD would have come knocking one by one. But as soon as Deputy Director Ross stepped in, everyone else was forced to withdraw their hands. If Jo Young had truly refused Deputy Director Ross yesterday, then the person knocking on his door today would likely have been the very familiar Phil Coulson. The books Jo Young came to borrow from the school library today were roughly divided into 3 parts, some related to cutting-edge experiments in modern biology, some knowledge about modern quantum physics, and the rest about house renovation. Since Jo Young planned to live in his current apartment long-term, he naturally had to renovate it. The living room on the first floor and the bedroom on the second floor were fine, but the basement below and the attic on the top floor had to be modified with the strictest security. By secretly arranging magic arrays, he would create an environment for Jo Young's magic cultivation and defense, just like the Sanctum Sanctorum in New York. Of course, he still needed to hand over the internal renovation work to a specialized firm, but while these firms were working, he would secretly carry out his own arrangements. In front of him, would those workers dare to say no? Moreover, they wouldn't remember any of this afterwards. As for the cutting-edge aspects of top-tier biological science, Jo-young briefly skimmed through them. Most of it was actually still about human experimentation and modification, just on a deeper level. Their applications were mostly in medical science, such as targeted DNA modification. But in reality, wasn't this also a part of super soldier experiments, just more refined? Modern physics was largely similar, simply a deeper understanding of energy and particles. The most cutting-edge areas here were quantum physics and nuclear physics. Quantum physics, when studied deeply, could even traverse time and space, while nuclear physics was enough to destroy everything. In fact, magic has many similarities with physics on many levels. Ultimately, what everyone is doing is understanding the world, it's just that different worldviews lead to different names for many things, but in reality, they are the same thing. Jo-young was holding a stack of books and was about to head to the circulation desk to check them out when, at that moment, a person walked past him, and a letter was slipped into the pile of books. After leaving the library, Jo-young quickly read the contents of the letter, committed everything to memory, and with a wave of his hand, the entire letter turned into ash and vanished. Although almost everyone has started using mobile phones, email, and other means for file transfer, Jo-young knows clearly that these things are not actually confidential. If no one checks your things, it's fine, but if someone really wants to check, even if you destroy your phone, as long as you have appeared on the communication network, everything can be restored. The United States government's supercomputers are not just one, the hard drives storing relevant data have long piled up into a mountain. After tidying up his things, Jo-young drove the rented car to Betty Ross's residence. Although they had broken up, in the eyes of outsiders, Jo-young had indeed stood on the opposite side of Bruce Banner. He probably could never shake off the title of Hulk. Betty Ross's detached villa is in New York's Upper East Side. Although it's not large or luxurious, the price here is more than 6 times that of Jo-young's apartment, and ordinary people can't even buy one if they want to. Betty Ross herself is a top scientist. Not to mention her role as a consultant for some biotech companies, just the papers she has published over the years, her salary as a professor at the school, and some patent licenses, have accumulated nearly 10 million in assets over the years. Seeing Jo-young push the door open and walk in with a box of food and a stack of books, Betty Ross, who was looking up information, was full of surprise. "Why are you here? I thought I wouldn't see you anytime soon." "What, you thought I was helping your general catch Hulk?" "I don't have that kind of free time," Jo-young said very directly, placing the cardboard box aside. "Your general asked me to look after you for a few days." Hey, I need to emphasize one point. This is because you will be my Charles professor in the future. It has nothing to do with other messy things, and we will only have a teacher-student relationship in the future." "I understand, men are all like this, aren't they?" Betty Ross turned back impatiently to study the information in her hand. Suddenly, she seemed to think of something, turned back to look at Jo-young, and asked, "From a professional perspective, strictly from a professional perspective, is it possible to use magic to control the function of certain special substances within cells?" "I know what you're talking about. I can tell you, it is possible," Jo-young said calmly, seeing the surprise flash in Betty Ross's eyes, then sneered inwardly. "You can freeze him completely using a temperature close to absolute zero, then there will be no problems whatsoever." Absolute zero. Betty Ross was slightly stunned at first, but she immediately understood what Jo-young meant, just like the frozen people that are particularly popular in certain circles now. First, the person is placed at a very low temperature and frozen, and then when future technology develops to a certain extent, they are unfrozen and resurrected. Betty Ross knew whether this method was feasible or not, but just like Schrödinger's cat, before the resurrection is performed, no one knows whether the people currently frozen are alive or dead. As for using this method on Hulk, Imperial College London, the 6 characters appeared in Jo-young's phone message. He put away his phone expressionlessly, then delivered the prepared dinner to Betty Ross. Without waiting for her reaction, he turned around and went back to working on his own things. Betty Ross took off her glasses, glanced at Jo-young's back, and then lowered her head to quickly type on the laptop in front of her. What appeared on the laptop screen was a game interface, and she was communicating with some people through the game. Since Jo-young arrived here, he had been very disciplined. Besides helping Betty Ross prepare 3 meals a day, he spent most of his time busy with his own affairs. Sometimes, when he was busy, the two of them might not even exchange a word all day. But honestly, Betty Ross felt quite comfortable with this atmosphere. No one interfered with her matters, but someone took care of everything around her. Perhaps having such a person around wasn't a bad thing. Marriage is, after all, a very sacred matter, even in America. You can fool around however you want before marriage, and no one will care, but if you continue to do so after marriage, at the very least you will face social condemnation, not to mention issues involving property. If it's serious, it could even trigger moral clauses in some contracts, which would be truly fatal. So, more often than not, two people live together for over a decade, even after their children are grown, yet they still haven't married. However, this thought merely flashed through Betty Ross's mind and she quickly refocused on the task at hand. The person she was communicating with through the game chat room at this moment was Dr. Bruce Banner. The reason for doing this was to avoid her father, General Ross, detecting that she was in contact with Bruce Banner, and then following the trail to find him. In fact, the reason she had spoken so little to Jo Young these past few days was also because of her father. If Jo Young hadn't reminded her, she wouldn't have realized that her father might have installed surveillance in her home. Betty Ross was already mentally prepared for her external communications to be monitored, but she never expected her father to be so deranged as to install surveillance in her own home, especially since her father hadn't stayed long that day and had little time to tamper with anything. But on second thought, General Ross had been constantly engaging her in conversation that day, and she hadn't paid any attention to the movements of his soldiers, so he definitely had the opportunity to tamper with things. And since it involved Bruce, he would certainly do it. Jo Young also realized this, which was why he reduced his communication with Betty Ross. Betty Ross was also using this current method to communicate with Dr. Bruce Banner, who was currently hiding at Imperial College London. In Jo Young's opinion, there was no need to deliberately search for Bruce Banner, he would reveal himself. This was New York, not a slum like those in Brazil. As long as Bruce Banner showed even a slight abnormality, he would immediately attract the attention of people from all sides. Just like Jo Young, he didn't need to go through Betty Ross to confirm that Bruce Banner was currently at Imperial College London. Anyone generating large-scale power consumption beyond normal production and research activities becomes a suspect for investigation. Then they would go door to door for searches. If a reasonable explanation couldn't be provided, or if they didn't have a sufficiently strong background, the United States military would immediately storm in. In fact, after careful screening and investigating individuals with research backgrounds similar to Dr. Banner's, they could basically be completely locked down. The reason Jo Young was able to confirm it a step ahead was because there were actually very few such people in all of New York. And if his guess was correct, General Ross was probably already on his way there. Their actions were a bit slower, but not by much. Meanwhile, inside Imperial College London, Bruce Banner had just finished communicating with Betty Ross and then looked at Dr. Samuel Stewart, also known as Dr. Stewart of Imperial College London, who was ready for the experiment. Dr. Stewart was also an expert in related fields, which was why Dr. Bruce Banner sought him out. In fact, their acquaintance originated from a chat room conversation on the dark web. Some secret experiments not officially recognized always required a lot of theoretical and financial support, and experts in similar fields would always open a secret chat room for discussions at certain times. Of course, everyone's identity was hidden, and even the pseudonyms used were changed after each use. So, although Bruce Banner had contacted Dr. Samuel Stewart, also known as Mr. Blue, many times under the identity of Mr. Green, it was their first time meeting in person. And it was indeed proven that the path Samuel Stewart was taking was very radical. He proposed using a highly toxic special drug to be injected into Dr. Banner's body when he transformed into Hulk, to neutralize or suppress the changes in his cell nucleic acid chains, and ultimately successfully control his transformation. The dosage of the drug involved was very difficult to control. If too little was used, it might have no effect at all, and if too much was used, those drugs could potentially kill Dr. Banner. Furthermore, how to control it was also an issue. Using it too early might not be effective, and if used too late, the powerful Hulk might have completely broken free from control, and by then, it would be too late for anything. In this society, those who are truly impoverished are always the scientific researchers who honestly conduct experiments according to the rules. Anyone who knows how to take a slightly unconventional or radical approach will have large companies throwing money at them, because only then is it possible to achieve results. Dr. Stewart was like this. In a place as expensive as Imperial College London, he owned his own independent laboratory. The entire laboratory was completely isolated both internally and externally, and all the equipment was the most cutting edge in the industry. Of course, this included an experimental bed designed to control Hulk for as long as possible. Otherwise, their experiment would have already ended, but now, everything was just beginning. Bruce Banner was tied down on the injection table, tightly bound at his own request. And only after all preparations were made, Dr. Banner nodded to Dr. Stewart. The next moment, a large amount of blood was drawn. This was just the first step, the purpose was still to control Hulk. A large amount of blood loss would affect Hulk after Dr. Banner transformed, causing him to be weak for a certain period of time. Even if this time was very short, it would be enough to inject the developed antidote. With a ZZZT sound, the electrodes were firmly applied to both sides of Dr. Banner's temples, and almost in the next moment, Dr. Banner's eyes turned completely green. Amidst violent roars, accompanied by painful deformation, perhaps due to the large amount of blood drawn, the transformation process was quite slow this time and appeared even more painful, more direct, and more shocking. With a loud bang, under Dr. Stewart's excited gaze, Hulk quickly took shape. Almost in the blink of an eye, half of the restraints controlling him snapped, and in his fierce struggle, the entire laboratory trembled. And it was at this moment that the reacting Dr. Stewart finally pressed the syringe. You have to admit, the antidote developed by Dr. Stewart was truly very effective. Hulk's angry struggles came quickly and went quickly. It was clear that Dr. Stewart's previous worries were a bit excessive. Even though the antidote contained intense toxicity, killing Hulk wasn't that easy. Most importantly, the computer next to them recorded all the data from this process. And it was at this moment that General Ross, who had been monitoring everything from outside, immediately gave the order, "Move out." At his command, American soldiers led by Blonsky immediately stormed into the laboratory. None of the checkpoints could stop them. You have to admit, General Ross's timing was very precise. This moment was probably the weakest moment for Hulk in the entire universe. The main reason they were able to monitor all of this closely through concrete walls was by relying on some special equipment they borrowed from S.H.I.E.L.D., which ultimately resulted in the physically weakened Dr. Bruce Banner being escorted out of the laboratory building by a team of American soldiers. General Ross's attention was also focused on Bruce Banner, and he didn't even notice that Blonsky hadn't followed them out, and Dr. Stewart was also left behind. And not long after, a yellowish-green giant reaching 3 meters in height appeared on the streets of New York. Compared to Hulk, this monster with jointed limbs like bone spurs was more insane and more difficult to control. And it was at this moment that a team of researchers wearing white protective suits had already broken into Dr. Stewart's laboratory. At this time, all the American soldiers who were originally guarding inside and outside the laboratory were either killed or had rushed to the streets following the monster that suddenly appeared. After this group entered the laboratory, they quickly packed up all the remaining blood samples of Dr. Bruce Banner and took them away. They also took the unconscious Dr. Stewart, but no one noticed that his forehead had been cut open and was bleeding, with a trace of green mixed in. Down. Zhou Yang's phone message tone sounded. After glancing at it, he deleted the entire content of the message. Getting up, he changed into a fresh set of clothes, then walked to the living room and woke up Betty Ross, who had fallen asleep at some point. He then said to her slightly bewildered eyes, "Do you want to go out and take a look? There's trouble on the streets of Manhattan. The internet just reported that a monster is rampaging through the streets." Zhou Yang's eyes were calm, but his words immediately jolted Betty Ross awake. Of course, she knew what Bruce Banner would do tonight. Although he had concealed the danger of the antidote from her, as a doctor of biological science and an expert in the relevant field, she certainly knew the risks involved. It was even possible that with a single mistake. Thinking of this, Betty Ross immediately turned on the television. At this moment, the quick-reacting CNN was already providing live coverage of the scene. Their people didn't dare to get too close, only filming from a distance behind the United States military, but they could see that it was a green monster with ferocious bone spurs on its back and a triangular head like a lizard, smashing and throwing things around madly as if without any consciousness. The poor New York police didn't know what was happening. They kept shooting at the monster, but the bullets couldn't even break its skin. With a casual wave, the monster sent several ordinary people flying. Car after car exploded, the rising flames illuminating the ferocious monster and making him even more terrifying, but also making his features clearer. That's not Bruce. When she saw the monster's face clearly, Betty Ross immediately stated with certainty. That's not unrelated to him either. Jo Young raised an eyebrow, saying somewhat uncertainly, or perhaps your father. With Jo Young's reminder, Betty Ross immediately understood. The appearance of that monster on the streets must be related to Bruce Banner's experiment. In fact, from the beginning of this experiment until now, it had always been solely controlled by General Ross. The monster that appeared now might be another one of his experimental subjects. What has he done? Before Betty Ross's words could finish, her phone rang. Betty, I need Daniel's help. At this moment, the only person General Ross could think of was Jo Young. He had contacted Stark, but Stark was currently in Los Angeles and couldn't make it back in a short time. Jo Young didn't mind, he was already preparing to go out. And just as he and Betty Ross opened the door and walked out, they happened to see General Ross descending from the sky in a helicopter, along with Dr. Bruce Banner, who looked very upset. Woo-woo-woo, the piercing siren echoed throughout Broadway Street. Chief Stacy drove like mad towards the front, needing to reach the front line as quickly as possible. 7 or 8 of his police officers were already dead, with many more's lives unknown. There was nothing he could do. In this situation, Chief Stacy couldn't do much. He could only weave through the congested traffic like a madman. At this point, even a slight mistake could lead to a collision with a car escaping outwards. But Chief Stacy still gripped the steering wheel steadily, his face serious. Although he had rarely been responsible for actual street work in recent years, the crazy Stacy back then was a legend of the New York streets. However, Chief Stacy was unaware that General Ross's helicopter was currently circling in the sky above him. Their target was also Blonsky, who was wreaking havoc below. At this moment, the atmosphere inside the helicopter was somewhat strange, especially for Bruce Banner, whose expression was very unnatural. This had been the case since they picked up Jo Young and Betty Ross from the villa. The two seemed very close, especially after General Ross intentionally or unintentionally told him that Jo Young had been staying there these past few days. Betty Ross didn't notice anything. She was highly intelligent but slightly less emotionally intelligent. In front of Jo Young and General Ross, she attentively cared for Bruce Banner, constantly asking about his physical condition after receiving the antidote, showing great concern. Meanwhile, Jo Young, as if he couldn't see any of this, said to General Ross, "General, I need to change into a military uniform. This will help avoid some trouble later." Hearing Jo Young say this, General Ross immediately understood that he didn't want to reveal his true identity. However, this actually benefited him, as it would be easier to explain things from all sides if the United States military personnel were the ones to resolve everything. This is the only set we have. We all wear unified uniforms during combat. Of course, if you want to be sniped by a sniper, that's another matter. General Ross casually pulled out a set of camouflage uniform from somewhere and handed it to Jo Young. Actually, I'm quite envious of American generals appearing in the media wearing such handsome military uniforms, but if there isn't one, there isn't one. Jo Young took the camouflage uniform, and while changing, continued speaking to General Ross, "General, if anyone comes to ask you about my identity in the future, I hope you can help me block them. I don't want endless trouble for 4 years of university. Don't worry, only a very small number of people know your identity, and besides me, no one else will contact you." General Ross spoke resolutely. He could guarantee this. Even when the bald head from S.H.I.E.L.D. called to include Jo Young in S.H.I.E.L.D.'s roster, General Ross strongly rebuffed him. In fact, besides Fury, only the president and the top brass of the United States military knew Jo Young's true identity. It was they who authorized General Ross to handle Jo Young's affairs. In recent years, with the increasing number of superheroes in the world, the United States military also needed its own super-powered team. This became even more important, especially when Stark absolutely refused to teach the technology of the Iron Man armor. Although Jo Young didn't know the specific details, he keenly grasped the conflict between the United States military and S.H.I.E.L.D. Moreover, if he remembered correctly, after the Hydra incident, it was the United States military that was responsible for cleaning up S.H.I.E.L.D. "Then I'll take care of the rest." With that, Jo Young nodded to General Ross, then glanced at Betty Ross again, and finally, with a strong pull, directly opened the helicopter door, and jumped out in everyone's astonished gaze. Seeing this scene, Betty Ross subconsciously screamed. You know, they were at least 300 meters in the air. Jumping down like that without any protection, an ordinary person would be smashed into meat paste. Don't worry, he has the ability to do this if he dares. General Ross, unexpectedly, had great confidence in Joe Young. However, at this moment, Bruce Banner couldn't help but say to General Ross, General, let me down. I can help too. General Ross looked deeply at Bruce Banner and instead asked an unrelated question, so you can still transform now? The American soldiers in the cabin reacted quickly. No sooner had General Ross finished speaking than the muzzles of their guns were pointed at Dr. Banner. You know, there was already a monster on the ground turning Manhattan into a mess. If another Hulk appeared now, the entire world would be in chaos, not to mention they were still in midair. Once Hulk transformed, they might all die. Facing General Ross's suspicion, Bruce Banner said with unusual composure, I have a feeling he won't let me die. The three people present were all very knowledgeable about the details of Bruce Banner's transformation into Hulk and had researched it the deepest. They all had a general understanding of what kind of existence Hulk was. General Ross had tried countless times to kill Bruce Banner before Hulk appeared, but he never succeeded. No matter how perfect his plan, Hulk could always appear at the most critical moment and incredibly save Bruce Banner. Then can you control him? General Ross stared intently at Bruce Banner, a strange glimmer of expectation suddenly flashing in his eyes. I think I should be able to. After a slight hesitation, Dr. Banner still gave an affirmative answer. Betty. General Ross suddenly turned to look at his own daughter. He needed Betty Ross to confirm this answer for him. At this moment, Bruce Banner also looked at Betty Ross full of expectation. He needed this opportunity. He needed to quickly transform into Hulk. Although he now had the antidote to control his own abilities, it didn't mean he was willing to fall into the hands of the United States military because of it. He should be able to. Betty Ross's words didn't even allow the smile on Bruce Banner's face to bloom for half a second before she continued, but the premise is that no one else attacks him. But in the scene below, who can control that? General Ross nodded expressionlessly, stopped talking, and turned back to continue observing the situation below, while the smile on Bruce Banner's face had completely frozen. At this moment, Betty Ross reached out and pressed his arm, saying softly and with concern, Bruce, your current condition is not suitable for taking risks. Betty Ross was still wholeheartedly thinking of Bruce Banner. She was very clear that even if Banner, who had taken the antidote, could transform into Hulk, he wouldn't be able to exert much of his strength. It was better to take this opportunity to observe Joe Yang's strength instead. But sometimes, a man's thoughts are not something you can control just because you want to. And at this moment, Blonsky, from a distance, looked as ferocious as a green triceratops. With a leap, several cars had already been directly crushed by him. The piercing screech of cars, the screams of the distant crowd, coupled with the constant gunfire from police and soldiers, mixed with occasional explosions, made everything even more chaotic. Fortunately, for some reason, the United States military actually appeared here, and soon, a batch of heavy weapons had been deployed. More than a dozen specialized rockets had been hoisted onto the soldiers' shoulders and then fired towards Blonsky without any hesitation. Compared to Hulk, Abomination, into which Blonsky transformed, was much more agile. He moved back and forth quickly, dodging most of the rockets in a very short time. But two rockets still hit him, and the blast wave directly staggered him. However, after the explosion, there was no trace of injury on Blonsky's body, a scene that stunned everyone. And at this moment, the enraged Blonsky had already grabbed a car from the ground and violently threw it towards the distant military vehicle. The soldiers in the vehicle quickly jumped out of the military vehicle in the crisis, and before they landed, the military vehicle had already exploded directly. Blonsky stood in the smoky street, shouting excitedly. He loved the thrill of destruction. He even couldn't help but roar loudly, Bruce, where are you? Come out, Bruce. In Blonsky's eyes, there was only Bruce Banner. In fact, the reason he became this monstrous appearance was for Hulk. Only by completely defeating Hulk could the rage in his heart be completely vented. This was destined from the time they were entangled in Brazil, and today was just the conclusion of everything. It's a pity that Blonsky didn't wait for Bruce Banner, but waited for Joe Young. With several consecutive, bang-bang, sounds, for some unknown reason, the fire hydrants on both sides of the street suddenly burst open. Two water columns, more than 20 meters high, shot directly into the air, and then, like a torrential downpour, poured directly onto Blonsky. If it was about causing destruction, Blonsky was definitely first class, but he had no way to stop the leakage of the fire hydrants, and he didn't even think about it at all. All he thought about was wanting to quickly escape this unpleasant environment. Blonsky ran forward abruptly, covering dozens of meters in the blink of an eye. However, before he could enjoy the dry environment, the fire hydrants on both sides of the street burst open again. In an instant, Blonsky was soaked through again. By this time, Blonsky had sensed that something was wrong, but he looked around, roaring constantly, but still couldn't find the location of the hidden enemy. Suddenly, Blonsky couldn't help but shiver all over. A cold wind blew, and he even trembled unnaturally. Suddenly, Blonsky stomped his foot hard, and the ground instantly cracked open. Using this momentum, he directly jumped onto a building dozens of meters high. However, before he could jump to the roof, a figure had already appeared above him, directly stepping on his chest. With a bang, Blonsky fell heavily from the high altitude, crashing heavily onto the ground. This impact directly created a deep pit in the ground, showing how severe the collision was. And at this moment, the figure stepping on Blonsky also appeared before everyone's eyes, and also appeared on major television channels. It was an American soldier wearing a United States military uniform and a United States military helmet. He was standing directly on Blonsky's chest. Although his physique was not as large as Blonsky's, at this moment, his towering image was directly imprinted on every American who saw this scene. This person was naturally Joe Young. To gain something, you must first give something. This scene of his seemed to be enhancing the image of the United States military, but in reality, wasn't he also wrapping himself in the tiger skin of the United States military? In today's world, the most powerful is not ancient one of Kamataj, nor Merlin, the legendary mage of Otherworld in England, but the powerful United States military. No one dares to say that they directly stand opposite the United States military, even Hydra is the same. Of course, this was not over yet. Blonsky was not that easy to deal with. Joe Yang's sudden attack only made him slightly dizzy. Joe Yang certainly wouldn't give Blonsky a chance to fight back. In the blink of an eye, the water on the ground seemed to have a consciousness, directly surging towards Blonsky. In an instant, it had enveloped his entire body in a huge water ball, and water continued to pour in. Even having transformed into the powerful abomination, Blonsky still hadn't fully adapted to his current physical state. The surrounding water gave him a suffocating feeling of being submerged in the deep sea. Just as he was trying to break free from the water ball again, he suddenly felt as if the water on his body had come to life, constantly flowing into his body through his eyes, ears, nose, and mouth. In an instant, his entire face changed. The wide street was already a mess, countless cars had long since blocked the entire street, and the people in the vehicles were swarming and fleeing towards the distance, where gunshots occasionally rang out, making everything look like a scene from the apocalypse. This is not strange at all. Whenever something happens in America, there is always a group of people who take the opportunity to cause trouble, smash, loot, burn, and commit all sorts of evil deeds, and at this very moment, the police do not have enough energy to deal with these matters. At this moment, more people were actually watching the scene unfolding on Hollywood Boulevard through television, and at this moment, almost everyone's eyes widened in surprise. The abomination Blonsky, who was originally imposing, fierce, brutal, and hideous, and had almost destroyed the entire block, was suddenly controlled by a ball of water, floating high above the ground. Blonsky, who was 3 meters tall and weighed at least half a ton, was actually made to float by a ball of water, directly escaping Earth's gravity, while he was completely unable to break free from the water ball's control. Without a point of support under his feet, Blonsky, who was in the water ball in midair, no matter how hard he struggled forward, was still unable to escape the control of the water ball. Even if he swam, the water ball would follow him wherever he swam. What made him even more uncomfortable was that the water flow in the water ball kept seeping into his body. It was only because his body was special. If it were anyone else, their internal organs might even be controlled by others. Looking at the appearance of the originally extremely vicious Blonsky now, he was exactly like a clown, with a tall stature and a hideous face, but completely powerless, with a look of desperation in his eyes, which instead made the people in front of their televisions unable to help but laugh. The President of the United States, who also saw this scene, let out a long sigh of relief in front of his subordinates, the Vice President, the Secretary of State, and the generals of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. The situation was finally under control, and it was the United States military who stepped forward, so at the very least his approval rating would not be hit because of this matter. On the contrary, if handled well, it could even bring him some positive support. "Mr. President, is that soldier on active duty?" the Secretary of State suddenly asked in a low voice. However, in this room, no matter how low your voice was, everyone would hear it, so at this moment, almost everyone's eyes fell upon the President of the United States. "That is an active duty Army major." "What, Mr. Secretary of State, do you still want to meet him?" The voice of the Secretary of Defense rang out first. He was one of only 2 people in the entire room who knew Zhou Yang's true identity. At this time, Zhou Yang had finally given the United States military some face. If his true identity was exposed, it would be the United States military that would look bad. The Secretary of State's question was very insidious. Don't look at how the 2 people often cooperate in foreign affairs. Both sides also have their own ambitions, so at some critical times, they are competing for their respective interests. It would be better if we could meet him. A crisis like this being resolved so quickly should indeed be properly rewarded. The Secretary of State smiled very enthusiastically. Finally, his gaze still fell upon the President of the United States. He should indeed be properly rewarded. As soon as the Secretary of State finished speaking, the Minister of the Interior immediately echoed him, and several other ministers also agreed with their opinions. The President of the United States sat there, looking at the giant water ball on the television screen, which had already reached a diameter of 10 meters, and Blonsky inside, who looked like a clown. He just watched with interest but did not speak. Slowly, everyone in the emergency defense room closed their mouths. At this time, it was the people from the Joint Chiefs of Staff who showed disdainful smiles. This is actually not strange. If you have a sufficient understanding of American politics, then you will know that although the President of the United States is the Commander-in-Chief of the America's Armed Forces, the units directly under his control are only a few small units like the Navy SEALs. They can carry out some small-scale drinking or assassination missions, but to conduct large-scale warfare, the most unavoidable people are the generals of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. They are the people truly responsible for the entire United States military's military operations in America. Even the Secretary of Defense has to stand aside in this regard. Within the American government, the position of Secretary of Defense must be a civilian officer. Even a general in the United States military must wait 5 years after retirement before being able to hold the position of Secretary of Defense. The Secretary of Defense is more responsible for the recruitment, training, and deployment of personnel, as well as various aspects of military procurement. They are not closely connected to actual combat operations. Even if they have a few small units under their command, most of them are similar in nature to the units in the hands of the President of the United States. If that American soldier on television is truly an active duty military member, and the Joint Chiefs of Staff are completely unaware, then it can only mean that these people are the President's people, which means that the Secretary of State asking for this person is actually asking for someone who belongs to the President. In fact, the struggle here is also very simple. The United States military is the most powerful military group on Earth. They are already powerful enough, yet they are still pursuing additional military strength, which makes many people unhappy. Therefore, they are simply unwilling to see the United States military possessing the power of such a superhero, or even a superhero team. That is why they want to fight for this candidate, but the question is, will the President let him go? Zhou Yang was unaware of the political infighting behind the scenes. All his attention was focused on Blonsky. Don't look at how tightly Blonsky was trapped by him now, but at this moment, he was gradually finding the trick to fight against Zhou Yang. This Blonsky stood steadily inside the water ball, and then suddenly threw a punch. The power was so strong that it directly created a vortex in the water. Following punch after punch, countless vortices were born, and these water currents began to gradually break free from Zhou Yang's control. Blonsky, no, to be precise, the abomination was not as brainless as he seemed. Although he had always appeared angry and direct, it now seemed that after encountering difficulties that were hard to solve, he quickly calmed down, just like this. Before, Blonsky was still fooling around randomly. He had been trying to break free from the control of the flowing water, but he had never considered the flowing water as his enemy. But now, he had begun to determine his goal. he wanted to destroy any single drop of water within his reach. At the same time, water columns were still continuously spraying from the fire hydrants on the street, pouring into the giant water ball in midair. But at this moment, everyone saw that the largest water ball was actually slowly shrinking back, while the gray-green monster inside began to punch and kick rhythmically, no longer just mindlessly angry as before. For some reason, their hearts suddenly tightened. Now Jo-young on the ground could very clearly feel Blonsky's resistance, but a few disdainful sneers appeared at his lips, as if everything was still under his control. No one knew that what Jo-young was doing was actually a performance for everyone to see. Although his own strength had dropped below the legendary level after returning to Earth, his vision was still there. To put it bluntly, as long as he did not encounter opponents holding Infinity Stones, then no matter who came before Jo-young, he was the number one person below the legendary level. Perhaps dealing with the powerful Hulk, he might struggle a bit, and as the Hulk's strength constantly grows, he will also become increasingly difficult to deal with, but Blonsky is different, he can be said to be firmly held in Jo-young's hands. The expression on Jo-young's face became increasingly solemn, even revealing a hint of difficulty, making it seem like he was losing control. And it was at this moment that a bang was heard. In front of everyone's eyes, Blonsky finally blasted the water ball in front of him with a punch. Countless water droplets turned into extremely sharp water arrows, piercing through all the walls of the tall buildings on both sides in the blink of an eye. Even the cars on the ground were riddled with holes by the water arrows. This showed how strong Blonsky's power was. Everyone who saw this scene turned pale instantly. At this moment, Blonsky directly smashed a fierce punch towards Jo-young in midair. However, facing Blonsky's punch, Jo-young calmly threw a punch. However, just after this punch was thrown, countless water droplets in midair quickly surged towards Jo-young, coating him with a thick layer in the blink of an eye. When his punch heavily collided with Blonsky, a 3-meter-tall water giant had appeared on the ground in an instant. The water giant completely enveloped Jo-young, and Blonsky's punch also heavily struck the water giant's fist. The water giant that suddenly appeared looked tall, but it was always worrying that he would be smashed apart just like that. However, the next moment, Blonsky's fist directly smashed into the water giant's body, and with a splash, the water giant had already appeared directly behind Blonsky. Blonsky's punch felt as if he had punched into empty space, all the force completely missed. If his body wasn't special now, he might have dislocated his own arm joint. The most crucial point was not this. After being penetrated by the water giant, Blonsky inexplicably felt a chill all over, as if something was lost from within his body. And this feeling was not the first time. When Jo-young first made his move, he had already felt a slight abnormality. Now it happened again, and he was almost certain that he had been ambushed by Jo-young at some point. Inexplicably, a surge of anger rose from Blonsky's heart. He clenched his fists tightly, turned around, and once again smashed towards the water giant behind him. For a moment, he was punching and kicking, splashing a lot of water onto the water giant's body. But what was the use of that? Although the water giant did not pass through Blonsky again, the water continuously gushing from the surrounding fire hydrants was constantly and quickly absorbed into the water giant's body. Although Blonsky temporarily tore off the water giant's arm and then broke the water giant's legs in close combat, in the blink of an eye, the water giant completely recovered as before. If faced with such a difficult enemy under normal circumstances, Blonsky would have retreated long ago, but now. The water giant and Blonsky engaged in close combat on the street, exchanging blows. This scene was not only seen by everyone in front of their televisions, but also clearly seen by General Ross and Bruce Banner high in the air. To be honest, if General Ross had not seen the wand in Jo-young's hand before, he might have really thought that Jo-young was a mutant who controlled water. But unfortunately, Jo-young was not. The abilities Jo-young possessed were far too numerous compared to ordinary mutants. Such people only had one or two ways of fighting with their abilities. Indeed, when their abilities were powerful to the extreme, they were indeed very difficult to deal with, but when their abilities were insufficient, they were easily targeted. This is also why the number of missing mutants has been increasing in recent years. Blonsky is going to be unlucky, Dr. Banner suddenly blurted out. When he saw that General Ross and Betty Ross were both looking at him with confusion, he quickly explained, "I wonder if you've noticed. The surrounding water is constantly flowing into the water giant's body, but the water giant's size hasn't increased at all, on the contrary, it's even shrinking a little. His original height was a bit taller than Blonsky, but now it's reversed. Never underestimate the power of water flow. Whether it was Betty Ross or General Ross, they were both top scientific talents. Not to mention Betty Ross, she was originally a doctor in the Department of Biological Sciences at Imperial University. And General Ross, for so many years, he had been in charge of the super soldier experiments. Without certain scientific research capabilities, it would be impossible for him to be in this position. And it was at this moment that with a bang, the water giant's fist and Blonsky's fist heavily smashed together. The next moment, the two of them just stood together like that. A powerful wind pressure spread out from the center where their fists collided, even causing the cars on the street to be firmly pressed against the walls under the impact of this force. By this time, the water giant's strength was no less than Blonsky's, and he had gradually taken control of the situation. With a boom, Blonsky was grabbed by Joe Young and thrown over the shoulder, slamming heavily onto the ground. The powerful impact directly cracked the ground into countless fissures, even spreading to the base of a building dozens of meters away, and this scene was perfectly captured by the television helicopter that had just arrived. Joe Young just looked up for a moment before turning his gaze towards Blonsky, who was quickly getting up. To be honest, although Blonsky was powerful, he ultimately couldn't compare to the Hulk. He looked fierce and agile compared to the Hulk, but his strength had a limit, and by now, he was basically approaching that limit. In fact, if Joe Young wanted to, he could have dealt with Blonsky a long time ago. He had even grasped the vital points within Blonsky's body, and if he were to pull on them, Blonsky would surely die. But at this moment, Joe Young didn't want to expose his true strength. He needed to establish a powerful opponent for the United States military. If all problems were solved by Joe Young, then the United States military might target him in the future. Of course, the powerful opponent Joe Young was referring to was not Blonsky. Blonsky wasn't qualified. He was talking about the Hulk. Another, and the most important, reason was that Joe Young needed to familiarize himself with the power he could exert on Earth. After all, Joe Young had only returned to Earth from Jotunheim a few days ago, and there was a big difference between Jotunheim and Earth. In Jotunheim, there was frost everywhere, and only under very special circumstances could you create water, and it had to be isolated from the external environment, otherwise, it would freeze in the blink of an eye in the -70 or 80-degree temperature. Joe Young was able to break through to the legendary realm thanks to being in such a special environment like Jotunheim, where the ice power was exceptionally dense, which greatly facilitated his research into ice magic. If Joe Young wanted to re-enter the legendary realm, the best way was to follow the path of ice magic. However, there was Odin's shadow behind all of this, which made Joe Young hesitant to easily venture into this field again. Water power is the closest to ice power, which is Joe Young's best choice besides ice magic. Moreover, using water magic in public now can also mislead the public, especially some of his enemies, which has a high possibility of becoming Joe Young's biggest trump card for a comeback in the future. Most importantly, facing a Blonsky who had power but didn't know how to use it accurately, Joe Young didn't need to use his trump card at all, and he didn't even fully unleash his water magic. However, Blonsky couldn't see through this at all. After he got up from the ground, he immediately rushed towards the water person Joe Young had transformed into again. But this time, Joe Young directly dodged his punch, instantly closed in on his body, and then fiercely punched him in the heart, making his body stiffen. Then, he threw him over the shoulder again, fiercely slamming Blonsky onto the ground once more. You have to admit that both the Hulk himself and the abomination Blonsky, who was transformed by his blood, have a common characteristic: they are very resistant to beating and have astonishing recovery abilities. Even if Wolverine Logan were here, it would probably be the same. But this is also good, it makes it easier for Joe Young to perform in front of the public. Blonsky charged up again and again, but was thrown to the ground repeatedly by Joe Young, who was more agile and powerful. And as the water continued to flow in, Joe Young's strength also grew stronger and stronger. Joe Young had a feeling that the scene of him repeatedly throwing Blonsky onto the street today would be repeated on television again and again in the future, because in the original timeline, the Hulk had done the same to Loki, which was very impactful. Joe Young glanced at the helicopter in the air. At this time, there were already 3 filming helicopters from different television stations, as well as helicopters from the local police station and the Federal Bureau of Investigation. The helicopter carrying General Ross, Betty Ross, and Bruce Banner was now flying very low. Perhaps now is the time for the Hulk to come down. Jo Young grabbed Blonsky again and threw him out fiercely. This time, he also used a little trick. Blonsky rolled out like a ball and rolled to the side of a utility pole. Don't think that Jo Yang's close combat ability is weak. Although he is a magician, he has spent so many years in Jotunheim. Although King Laufey of the Frost Giants ordered others not to harm him, this does not mean that he can rest easy. Those Frost Giants always beat him up, causing no specific substantial damage, but it was also a great insult to him. In this situation, in the repeated battles with the Frost Giant warriors, Jo Yang's fighting skills grew rapidly, especially when he later broke through to the legendary magician realm. Even ordinary Frost Giant warriors were not his opponents in close combat. So dealing with Blonsky was completely fine for Jo Young, let alone doing something more in secret. Blonsky immediately crashed into the side of a utility pole. This time, the guy didn't immediately get up quickly, but reached out and grabbed the utility pole next to him, and immediately pulled the utility pole out of the ground. A series of electrical sparks flickered. The high-voltage wires on this utility pole had been torn apart. The broken high-voltage wires fell onto the cars below, splashing countless electrical sparks. The entire street, including the buildings on both sides, quickly darkened. Fortunately, there were still several helicopters in the sky above, and their searchlights immediately turned on, but in order to see everything happening on the ground more clearly and accurately, they had to lower the height of the helicopters as much as possible. Blonsky swung the utility pole in his hand and directly smashed it towards the water giant Jo Young had transformed into. However, the water giant stood there straight, as if stunned. Many people watching this scene in front of the TV couldn't help but cover their mouths and scream, but some smart people could see that Jo Young was doing this on purpose. Indeed, Blonsky's utility pole directly hit Jo Yang's body, but it passed through in an instant. The long utility pole directly horizontally pierced through Jo Young, directly cutting him in half at the waist. If you couldn't still see Jo Young in the water giant, then you might think he had disappeared somewhere. However, this scene still made some people can't help but sit up. If it is really as they imagined, it means that Jo Young has a certain degree of physical immunity. This is the most terrifying thing. It means that most of the United States military's weapons are completely ineffective against him. But fortunately, they quickly remembered that Jo Young was wearing the uniform of a United States soldier, otherwise, they would have already started considering how to deal with Jo Yang's abilities. However, Jo Young was not concerned about these things at the moment, because at this time, a water rope had appeared in his hand. After the utility pole in Blonsky's hand passed through Jo Yang's body, it was immediately entangled by a water rope. While being tightly entangled, the water rope also continuously spread towards Blonsky's hands. Blonsky could already sense some danger. He first pulled the utility pole back, and then quickly let go during the struggle with Jo Young, avoiding being entangled by Jo Yang's water rope, and the utility pole was thrown away. The thrown utility pole flew into the air in an instant, and immediately pierced through the entire helicopter. At the same time, the splashing wires also hit another helicopter not far away. General Ross and the CNN News helicopter also did not expect to suffer such an unexpected disaster. General Ross's helicopter was better off, only the circuit control of the propeller was slightly damaged. Although it was falling out of control, it could still manage a forced landing. But the CNN News helicopter was different. They fell straight towards the ground, completely out of control, and were about to crash. At this moment, Bruce Banner suddenly broke free from all restraints and directly jumped from General Ross's armed helicopter, which was slowly making a forced landing. Only Betty Ross's scream of, "Bruce," was left in the air. "Be careful." General Ross grabbed his daughter and then looked at the jumping Bruce Banner with a grim face, but in his heart, he had already fiercely cursed this stupid woman of his. She thought that Bruce Banner jumped down in a panic because he wanted to transform into the Hulk to save the people on the other armed helicopter, but in reality, only General Ross knew that Bruce Banner's ultimate goal was to escape. Even if he could jump down and transform into the Hulk in time, to rely on the Hulk to save people, haha, it would be good if he didn't kill anyone. At this time, Jo Young, who was already prepared, saw Bruce Banner jump off the helicopter and immediately transformed into a long stream of water, directly rolling towards the falling news helicopter in midair. At the most critical moment, he piled up a water cushion layer up to 5 meters high under the news helicopter. Immediately after, the news helicopter crashed into the water cushion layer. Even with the water cushion layer, the people in the news helicopter were still thrown around. It was just that their helicopter was not very high, otherwise, at their normal flying altitude, even if they fell into the water, it would probably be no different from falling onto concrete. These people had just recovered when they saw the water cushion turn back into a stream of water and rush directly towards General Ross's armed helicopter. This time, Jo Young did not transform into a water cushion, but directly touched the armed helicopter's propeller, using the helicopter's own power to make it land steadily on the ground. Immediately after, Jo Young appeared and stood beside General Ross. "General." Jo Young nodded to General Ross, and then looked at Betty Ross. At this time, Betty Ross was looking intently at the center of the street, because at this moment, the Hulk was already fighting with Blonsky. In any case, the Hulk had been injected with the antidote beforehand. Even if he successfully transformed into the Hulk, the power he could exert was very limited. He was practically being beaten by Blonsky, and he looked very miserable. Seeing this scene, Betty Ross subconsciously took a step forward. It was this step that made her completely sober. She quickly turned to look at General Ross and Jo Young next to her. Finally, she grabbed Jo Young's arm and pleaded with a face full of entreaty, "Daniel, save him." If Jo Young really had any feelings for Betty Ross, then he might really be very angry. If he saved him, everything would ultimately benefit his biggest love rival. If he didn't save him, he would appear narrow-minded, and he would be in a dilemma. But fortunately, Jo Young didn't have such deep feelings for Betty Ross. He finally looked at General Ross. "General, make your move. If you don't, his strength will really fully recover." General Ross nodded expressionlessly, looking at Jo Young, who rushed out, and at the same time looking at her father. Betty Ross said with a look of disbelief, "Could it be that he is doing this for?" Chapter 31. This time, Jo Young didn't transform into the water giant again. With a wave of his hands, the towering water pillars in midair already coiled around Blonsky's legs. At this moment, Blonsky was pressing down on the Hulk, so he didn't notice the water pillar that had just coiled over. Actually, calling it a water pillar is somewhat inappropriate, but if you call it a water rope, honestly, no one has ever seen a rope as thick as a bowl. But at this time, everything was very suitable. The water pillar as thick as a bowl directly coiled around Blonsky's legs, which was just right wrapped around Blonsky, who was 3 meters tall. The powerful force directly threw Blonsky into the air, and then slammed him hard onto the ground again. This time, it smashed him dizzy, and the water pillar took the opportunity to coil all over Blonsky's body, binding him tightly. Everyone who saw this scene couldn't help but breathe a sigh of relief, but they were still staring closely at the screen. They were actually still a bit worried that Blonsky would break free from Jo Young's control as before, but what they didn't expect was that the other monster rushed up at this moment, directly smashing towards Blonsky, completely disregarding that he was already controlled by Jo Young, and then fiercely smashed towards the water flow controlling Blonsky's body. The water flow controlling Blonsky, all its power source comes from Jo Young's magic. It is Jo Young's magic that gives such a stream of water a peculiar ability, but the Hulk's fierce punch directly scattered Jo Young's magic on the water stream with one punch. Moreover, he didn't just use one punch. While fiercely smashing Blonsky in a very short time, he also smashed the water flow controlling Blonsky's body to smithereens. With a roar, Blonsky had already jumped up from the ground and slammed his knees fiercely into the Hulk's chest, knocking him flying. However, this time Blonsky did not continue to target the Hulk, but turned around and charged towards Jo Young. Originally, in Blonsky's mind, surpassing the Hulk was what he pursued, but now, Jo Young was his real threat. At the same time, the Hulk, who had jumped up again, also rushed in the same direction. His target also seemed to be Jo Young. Seeing this scene, Betty Ross felt incredibly absurd in her heart for a moment. She didn't expect that her request for Jo Young to act just now would lead to such a scene. It was already quite difficult for Jo Young to deal with Blonsky alone, but now the Hulk was also targeting him. Can he handle facing 2 monsters alone? Dad, you have to find a way to help him. Betty Ross could only ask her father, General Ross, for help now. General Ross snorted coldly with annoyance. "Now you know you were wrong. HMPH. You don't have to worry too much, he will be fine." Ever since General Ross saw his superb illusion ability at Jo Young's house, he knew that this guy was definitely not that easy to deal with, and in the current melee, his own ability was even easier to exert. However, Jo Young did not directly use illusions as General Ross thought. He saw him place his hands flat, and in the next moment, two sharp water blade scimitars had condensed in his hands, and then quickly rotated and shot towards Blonsky's ankles. And the ankles are their Achilles heel for tall giants. And it was not only that, but one after another water blade scimitars quickly appeared in Zhou Yang's hands, and then attacked Blonsky in rapid succession. Hundreds and thousands of water blade scimitars formed in the blink of an eye, and under the gaze of countless people, they converged into a narrow river of water blade scimitars, which attacked Blonsky's rear ankles with extreme speed, looking like a single-sided chainsaw from a distance. Whether it was the Hulk or Blonsky, their physical strength was top-notch. Coupled with their strong physical recovery ability, it was difficult for ordinary people to destroy their bodies. However, even so, Zhou Yang's water blade scimitars quickly drew deep red marks on Blonsky's rear ankles. Blonsky only took 3 steps, and his rear ankle was already cut open, and yellowish-brown blood instantly gushed out. Unsteady on his feet, Blonsky fell heavily to the ground, and at this moment, the Hulk rushed up immediately, but his target was never Zhou Yang, but Blonsky. The two quickly tangled and fought on the ground. Although Blonsky's heel was cut off, his upper body was not affected at all, and coupled with the fact that the Hulk's strength had not recovered to its peak, the two fought fiercely and seemed very evenly matched. Everyone who saw this scene, including Zhou Yang, was a little dumbfounded. It turned out that the Hulk's target was Blonsky all along, and it had nothing to do with Zhou Yang at all. Zhou Yang quickly figured out the reason for this. For the Hulk, the most important thing now is to restore his strength. However, Zhou Yang rarely fights head-on with people, and only occasionally does so when he transforms into a water giant, but now that Zhou Yang's true body has appeared, although he has the ability to overwhelm Blonsky, he is not favored by the Hulk, so his target is naturally Blonsky. So at this time, is it still necessary for Zhou Yang to act? Daniel. General Ross's voice quickly came from behind. Zhou Yang turned his head and glanced at him, only to see General Ross directly make a forward attack gesture. After all, Zhou Yang was wearing an American military uniform at this time, at least on the surface, he still had to obey General Ross's orders. Moreover, General Ross's worries were also reasonable. As the Hulk and Blonsky continued to fight, his strength aura was rapidly growing. If this continued, it wouldn't take long for the Hulk to become even stronger and more difficult to deal with. Zhou Yang's magic wand was always hidden in his sleeve. He saw him quickly form a magic seal with his hands, and in the next moment, the water blade scimitars that were constantly rotating in midair immediately swirled towards the Hulk's neck. The stinging pain on his neck quickly attracted the Hulk's attention, and his first reaction was to fiercely punch the water blade scimitars behind him. With just one punch, the extremely sharp water blade scimitars, like a chainsaw, were directly blown apart by more than half a meter. If it weren't for Zhou Yang's strong control, the entire water flow would have probably been directly broken by him, which shows how strong the Hulk's power is. At this time, facing the powerful and crazy Hulk, Blonsky was already a little unable to hold on. Firstly, he was severely injured by Zhou Yang, and his strength could not be exerted up to 70%, and as the Hulk's strength continued to recover, Blonsky could only parry for a while, and had no power to fight back. However, compared to the Hulk, the bone spurs on Blonsky's body helped him withstand many of the Hulk's attacks, which prevented him from being smashed to death by the Hulk. But now, Zhou Yang began to attract the Hulk's attention. After all, Blonsky could not provide him with much help anymore. Stepping heavily on Blonsky's chest, he almost suffocated Blonsky. The Hulk slowly stood up and turned to look at Zhou Yang, who was standing 30 meters away. At this time, Zhou Yang had already retracted all the water blade scimitars, forming a water flow ribbon several tens of meters long centered on himself, except that the outermost layer of these water flow ribbons were all continuous and extremely sharp water blade scimitars. Amidst the rippling waves, one could even see the reflection of the distant firelight. For a moment, the surroundings suddenly fell silent. On the street, only Zhou Yang and the Hulk faced each other from a distance. Blonsky lay on the ground, not knowing whether he couldn't get up or didn't dare to get up. Betty Ross, who saw this scene from a distance, was just about to stop the Hulk, but at this moment, she heard the Hulk suddenly roar fiercely and directly rushed towards Zhou Yang. His momentum was exceptionally strong, like a bulldozer that could never be stopped. Facing the Hulk, Zhou Yang was no longer as relaxed as when facing Blonsky. After all, Blonsky has only had such powerful strength for a short time, but the Hulk is different. He became the Hulk several years ago, and during these years, he has been constantly pursued by General Ross. His strength has long been honed, and most importantly, his strength has no upper limit. The more you make him feel pain, the more you make him feel angry, and the angrier he is, the stronger his strength becomes. Then, when he rushed towards him, Jo Young pointed his right hand forward, and the water flow ribbons around his body immediately rushed towards the Hulk. Their target was the vital point of the Hulk's neck. It wasn't that he didn't want to attack Zhou Yang's heel, but that he knew this plan was no longer feasible. Whether it was Blonsky or the Hulk, they both showed considerable intelligence in the previous battles, although sometimes they couldn't control themselves because of anger. This didn't mean they were stupid. On the contrary, in battles, they were all very cunning. Zhou Yang's previous encounter with Blonsky had already shown the Hulk some of Zhou Yang's weaknesses, so when facing the rushing water blade scimitars, the Hulk didn't hesitate and punched hard. However, in this sudden moment, the water flow ribbons that were originally gathered together suddenly dispersed, instantly turning into countless smaller water flow ribbons, directly slashing past the Hulk's chest, back, lower abdomen, and between his legs, bringing up strings of green blood beads. Although the dispersed power could not cause greater damage to the Hulk, this alone was enough to prove that Zhou Yang was not easy to mess with. And it was this moment that made the Hulk feel pain and couldn't help but be slightly startled. Zhou Yang actually had such a move. However, in the next moment, the Hulk directly laughed. He no longer cared about the several small water flow ribbons around him and directly strode towards Zhou Yang, with even some joy in his expression. Zhou Yang just glanced at it and knew the reason. Although those water blade scimitars did cause some damage to the Hulk, such tiny wounds recovered completely in the blink of an eye. With a light sigh, Zhou Yang clenched his fist, and the water blade scimitars that appeared behind the Hulk immediately killed back from the Hulk's back at a faster speed. This time, they did not converge because of the Hulk's erosion, but still turned into 4 or 5 small water flow ribbons, bringing up strings of green blood on the Hulk's body while quickly flying towards Zhou Yang and finally integrating into the water ball that appeared outside his body at some point. Water ball, this is the most common thing, without any mystery, just a simple water ball. A water ball with a radius of 4 or 5 meters, directly wrapping Zhou Yang, and the volume of the water ball is constantly expanding due to the influx of countless water flows from all around. The Hulk didn't care about that much. His eyes were directly fixed on Zhou Yang in the water ball. In just a few seconds, he had already rushed to the front of the water ball and then punched the water ball with force. But unfortunately, his punch hit nothing. Zhou Yang's water ball was like it had no power. Although the Hulk's punch splashed a lot of water, water is just water, and there is no other special place. He easily stepped into the water ball. The Hulk stared at Zhou Yang's position and kept moving forward. After only a few steps, he came to Zhou Yang and was about to punch, but in the next moment, the Hulk's fist stopped in midair. Because in front of him, Zhou Yang, who he had been firmly locked onto, had disappeared, and instead appeared 4 or 5 meters away. The other party had actually escaped at some point, which made him can't help but be startled and even more angry, and he quickly chased after him. He punched out again, and this time he truly hit Zhou Yang's body, but in the next moment, he himself fell out of the water ball. When he was in the water ball before, the Hulk had been holding his breath. As soon as he rushed out, the very viscous flowing water around him disappeared, and instead, countless air filled with the smell of war rushed into his nose. Looking at the somewhat bewildered expression of Hulk as he just emerged from the water sphere, some news channels deliberately zoomed in. People in front of their televisions couldn't help but burst into laughter, and the next moment, their laughter grew even louder, because Hulk immediately plunged back into the water sphere. He didn't look up once throughout, because at this moment, Zhou Yang was standing on top of the water sphere. In reality, those on the ground were the ones who didn't see clearly, because they had no idea there was a Zhou Yang inside the water sphere. Hulk's gaze was always fixed on that Zhou Yang, he just didn't know that Zhou Yang was fake. Actually, Hulk shouldn't have entered the water sphere from the beginning. Inside the water sphere, it was too convenient for Zhou Yang to use the properties of water to cast illusions and lure Hulk. On the surface, he seemed to be staring at Zhou Yang, but unknowingly, he had already drifted off course. To be honest, if it were a different environment, with no one watching, then Zhou Yang would not mind having a real, head-on fight with Hulk. Perhaps he couldn't defeat Hulk, and even a draw would be difficult, but making Hulk suffer a significant loss was something he could do. But in the current environment, he could only avoid the real and attack the void. Don't look at how Hulk is being played around by him now, but he hasn't hurt Hulk in the slightest. Moreover, if he guessed correctly, Hulk would soon understand. After all, he wasn't truly stupid. Indeed, after repeatedly plunging in and out of the water sphere 3 times, Hulk immediately came to his senses, and in the first instant, he saw Joe Young standing above the water sphere. After an angry roar, Hulk had already directly leapt towards Joe Young, and in midair, he savagely threw a punch. But facing this scene, Joe Young merely glanced at Hulk. The next moment, he had quickly merged into the water sphere. Hulk's punch was like hitting the surface of water. Although it created a large hole, he himself also fell back into the water sphere. As the surrounding water continued to pour in, the area of the water sphere grew larger and larger. Although Hulk was punching and kicking with all his might inside the water sphere, for the ordinary water within the sphere, Joe Young didn't use any magic at all. He only needed to maintain the existence of this water sphere. The previous illusions couldn't confuse Hulk at all, and Joe Young wasn't inside the water sphere at this time either. He had already jumped out long ago, merely using an invisibility spell and hiding nearby. Of course, the people in front of their televisions definitely couldn't find Joe Young. They all thought that this time Joe Young was definitely staying in the water sphere just like Hulk. Watching Hulk rampage freely, many people couldn't help but feel their hearts clench. But to be honest, there were still some people who saw through or guessed Joe Young's location, such as Professor X whose psychic power had arrived, Fantastic Four Reed Richards who was observing this scene through television, as well as Iron Man Stark, and even bald Nick Fury. They were all smart people and naturally knew the truth behind Hulk being toyed with, but none of them had any intention of reminding Hulk. With a bang, Hulk directly jumped out of the water sphere, but this time there was no longer so much anger on his face. His eyes calmly looked towards Betty Ross in the distance, and it was this moment that instantly changed Deputy Director Ross's expression completely. His strength has completely recovered. Deputy Director Ross's voice sounded in Betty Ross's ear, and it was at this instant that Betty Ross quickly understood Hulk's plan. Don't look at how Hulk has been like a clown these past few days, being played around by Joe Young, but in reality, during this time, he has been recovering his strength by delaying time, and now that time has passed, his strength has also fully recovered. He's leaving. Deputy Director Ross was the person in this world who understood Hulk the most, even more than his daughter Betty Ross. Of course, Hulk is Hulk, and Dr. Banner is Dr. Banner, they are completely two different things. Deputy Director Ross understood Hulk the most, while his daughter Betty Ross understood Dr. Banner the most. There is a difference here. Betty Ross naturally heard her father's words very clearly. Her eyes looking at Hulk were filled with worry, while Hulk, who was also looking at her, showed a very rare hint of encouragement in his eyes. The next moment, Hulk already looked solemnly at the huge water sphere in front of him. His right hand suddenly lifted, like drawing a bow and notching an arrow. High-definition cameras could even capture the countless muscles bulging on his huge green skin. Immediately after, Hulk's fist had slammed fiercely onto the huge water sphere in front of him. This time was completely different from the previous times. With one punch from Hulk, the entire water sphere instantly exploded. The huge water sphere with a diameter of over 10 meters had all its parts subjected to the impact of Hulk's powerful force at once. All the magic Joe Young used to maintain the existence of this water sphere was completely destroyed at this moment, and even a stream of water was directly smashed by Hulk's fist, flying dozens of meters away, scattering everything all over the street. And it was amidst the countless scattered water splashes that Joe Young reappeared, standing only 10 meters away from Hulk. Both of them could even see the deep power in each other's eyes. The next moment, the two of them had already rapidly charged towards each other, and from the moment Joe Young took his first step, countless surrounding water currents had rushed to the surface of his body. After he took his second step, a water giant as tall as Hulk reappeared on the street. Countless water currents continuously poured into Joe Young's body, but his size stopped growing from this moment on, and instead surprisingly shrank a little, which also meant his power was extremely condensed. The next moment, he had already collided fiercely with Hulk. Hulk's savage punch directly smashed into the chest of Joe Young's water giant, instantly opening a large hole in his chest, while Joe Young punched with all his might onto Hulk's chin, the powerful force directly sending him flying out, landing heavily on the ground. If it were anyone else, after taking that punch from Hulk and having their chest pierced by a single punch, they would probably have lost their life long ago, but Joe Young was different. Although a considerable amount of Hulk's power acted on his own body with that punch, more of it was dispersed by the water giant, and as for the water giant, its damage. Countless water currents poured into the wound of the water giant, instantly repairing the giant hole the size of a bowl. Although Zhou Yang's punch sent Hulk flying, with his self-healing ability, he recovered completely in an instant, then quickly stood up, his wide-open mouth filled with anger as he looked at the water giant in the distance. And facing such a Hulk, the water giant standing in the middle of the street spread his hands, and the fire hydrants around, which were still spraying countless water columns, at this moment seemed to be sucked by a pump. More water flowed into Zhou Yang's hands at a speed far exceeding before. The body color of the water giant was rapidly changing towards a deep blue direction, and even a hint of black appeared in his eyes. The power of the water giant was deepening, which also meant he was becoming more difficult to deal with. It was at this time that hundreds of American soldiers rushed out from behind the street, quickly came to Deputy Director Ross's side, firmly protecting him, and all their weapons were aimed at Hulk at the first moment. This series of movements finally shifted Hulk's attention from Zhou Yang to Deputy Director Ross. Looking at Deputy Director Ross, a trace of disdain flashed in Hulk's eyes, and finally, he looked at Zhou Yang again, shaking his head with some regret. Immediately after, Hulk stomped his feet fiercely, and his entire body shot straight into the sky, leaping 40 to 50 meters high in one go, grabbing into the wall of a tall building, and then using the leverage to jump further away. Countless bullets flashed past, chasing after Hulk, but in the end, everyone could only watch his figure disappear at the end of their sight. Even the helicopters following closely behind could only follow him to the edge of the Atlantic Ocean, where Hulk had completely vanished. Zhou Yang also vanished. After Hulk disappeared, the water giant suddenly disintegrated without anyone noticing, but after it collapsed, there was no trace of anyone inside. The fire hydrants around, which were constantly spraying water columns, at this moment seemed to be squeezed flat, finally completely stopping the spray of water. Now they just waited for the fire department to come and deal with it. The street brawl ended anticlimactically like this. Deputy Director Ross also quietly withdrew with his daughter Betty Ross and a group of American soldiers, leaving the New York government to handle all the aftermath. In the following days, the public strongly demanded that the authorities reveal the true identity of the water giant. They were very interested in this superhero who saved Manhattan from chaos and defeated two super monsters, and some even ranked him alongside superheroes like Iron Man and Spider-Man. Of course, although the public wasn't very interested in Abomination Blonsky and Hulk, the authorities were different. They not only demanded that the United States military reveal the true identity of the water giant but also demanded that the United States military disclose everything about Abomination and Hulk. Don't treat the white elites of the American government as fools. If this matter didn't involve the United States military, then when Abomination Blonsky and Hulk were rampaging through the streets of Manhattan, the United States military wouldn't have appeared so quickly. It only shows that the United States military itself came for them. What was seen in the public media was just a lively public opinion farce, but in places people couldn't see, it was naked political maneuvering. When Zhou Yang saw Deputy Director Ross again, he was alone in Betty Ross's house, drinking heavily. When Zhou Yang saw him, he was wearing a military uniform, but the insignia of an active soldier on the uniform was completely gone. He had been completely dismissed from his post and even required to retire directly. Seeing Zhou Yang, Deputy Director Ross directly picked up a green booklet from the side and threw it to Zhou Yang, then took a puff of his cigar and said impatiently, "This is an identity I got for you, an active American military officer, a real military officer identity, but your existence cannot be found in any military sequence." While saying this, Deputy Director Ross glanced at Zhou Yang, watching his reaction upon seeing this active military officer's identification. Zhou Yang had indeed anticipated that Deputy Director Ross would get him an official identity version. After all, these days, the media were speculating which active American military officer the water giant who appeared on the street was. If it was finally revealed that the water giant was not an active officer at all, or even not an American, then some people might really be embarrassed then. Zhou Yang opened the green identification booklet. It had his own photo, and the name was also Daniel Whitehouse. Whitehouse, this had a similar meaning to a name he might use in the future, Daniel Whitehall, after all, Whitehall, the Foreign Office. Whitehouse, the same meaning. But honestly, whether in America or England, there are quite a few people who use Whitehouse and Whitehall as their surnames. Daniel Whitehouse, Major in the American Army, affiliated with the Department of Defense. Everything was very formal, but there was no specific military unit name. If there is a place where you are needed, the White House will send someone to contact you directly, Deputy Director Ross said lightly. Joe Young raised an eyebrow, looked at Deputy Director Ross, and said, "So now I'm under the direct command of the President of the United States. It always has to go through me." Deputy Director Ross downed a glass of beer, then sneered, "I'm retiring from the United States military, of course I have to get some benefits. I can't let those guys take over everything." Joe Young understood. When Deputy Director Ross handed him over, he also made a deal with the President of the United States. "So you're going into politics from now on?" Joe Young seemed to remember something and looked at Deputy Director Ross with some uncertainty. "Maybe." Deputy Director Ross didn't give a definite answer. After downing one glass of wine, he poured another, and it was at this moment that the door of the house was pushed open. A middle-aged man wearing a sharp suit, black-rimmed glasses, and a small mustache below his nose walked in from outside, humming something. Although New York is often called the city that never sleeps, the truly sleepless areas are only a few. In most residential areas, it starts to quiet down gradually after 11 p.m. A Mercedes slowly stopped in front of a detached apartment building. Although the sound was low, it still caused the neighbors who had just started to fall asleep to poke their heads out. Joe Young got out of the car, nodded apologetically to the watchful eyes around him, and then casually strolled in front of his apartment door. He hadn't expected to meet Tony Stark tonight. When he had participated in Dr. Erskine's super soldier experiment under a different identity, he had met Tony Stark's father, Howard Stark. He hadn't expected to meet his son now. Tony Stark, this playboy, although he often appeared on the front pages of newspapers and magazines, his age was indeed not low. Even if Howard Stark had him late, Tony Stark was already close to 38 years old this year. It was clear that Joe Yang's identity as the water giant could not be hidden from Tony Stark, otherwise he wouldn't have chosen to show up directly when Joe Yang was at Betty Ross's apartment. It was not difficult to find out Joe Yang's identity. As long as you trace the people and things Deputy Director Ross had come into contact with during this period, you could quickly find out his identity. However, it was a bit late to take action now. Unless you had a super intelligent system like Jarvis, the technical personnel of the United States military would teach you a good lesson. So, even when some cabinet members didn't know Joe Yang's identity, Stark had already come knocking. Stark is a successful top scientist. He is also a successful businessman, and American businessmen have always had close ties with the political world. Stark is no exception. They invest large sums of money in every American election, and it is the same now. Stark can often enter and exit the White House freely, and the president can call him directly. Their relationship can be said to be very close. The news that Deputy Director Ross was about to enter politics could not be hidden from Stark. Although Deputy Director Ross cannot be said to be without money, politics has its own rules, so he still needs a considerable amount of financial support. This is the main reason Stark came this time. Of course, Stark also invited Joe Young to join the superhero group, the Avengers, which S.H.I.E.L.D. was about to form. In recent years, especially after Stark publicly announced that he was Iron Man, many super-powered individuals emerged from various states in America. Some tried to become superheroes, while others became supervillains, but more people violated the law intentionally or unintentionally. For these people, the police usually couldn't handle them, which often required S.H.I.E.L.D.'s intervention. However, as the super-powered individuals who appeared became stronger and stronger, even S.H.I.E.L.D. felt somewhat powerless, which is why the Avengers were formed. But regarding Stark's invitation, Deputy Director Ross refused first, not even waiting for Joe Young to speak. He stated that the initiative on this matter was in the White House's hands and even placed the active military officer's identification documents that Joe Young had just obtained in front of Stark. Although Stark had already thoroughly investigated Joe Yang's identity and knew that he wasn't even American, his active military officer's identification documents were indeed real. And even if he wasn't truly American, given America's status as a world hegemon, whether he was American or not had no meaning, it was enough as long as he could be used by America. Since the president personally took charge of this chess piece, he naturally would not allow others to interfere freely. Whatever Stark wanted to do, he had to discuss with the president. A hint of regret appeared on Zhou Yang's face as Stark left helplessly. To be honest, although he was unwilling to deal with the current shield, if he could join the Avengers and become Thor's comrade in arms, even temporarily, for him, before Hydra was completely exposed, he would be absolutely safe. Deputy Director Ross perhaps didn't fully understand Zhou Yang's thoughts. He said very directly, "Don't think of this as a good thing. Not to mention that Nick Fury of S.H.I.E.L.D. is not easy to deal with, the World Security Council behind them is also not simple. This matter is very complicated." When Deputy Director Ross said this, Zhou Yang understood. There was indeed a certain degree of political struggle mixed in. Although S.H.I.E.L.D.'s headquarters are in America, even in Washington, it is not a direct subordinate agency of the American government. Instead, it belongs to the United Nations World Security Council. Although the American government has a strong voice in it, it is not a place where it can have the final say. If the other few countries unite, even the American government will have a hard time resisting. If you think about it carefully, the final members of the Avengers, besides Captain America Rogers and Iron Man Stark, Black Widow is a traitor from Russia, Hawkeye is a member of a traveling circus, Hulk is absolutely at odds with the American government, and Thor is not even an Earthling. Therefore, the American government has very little control over the Avengers, which is why the Avengers eventually split and had a civil war. And Zhou Yang was even more aware of the reasons behind the formation of the Avengers. Nick Fury didn't start forming the Avengers because of the endless stream of superheroes in recent years. All of this was predetermined from the entanglement between Captain Marvel Carol and the Kree back then. Even the name Avengers was given by Carol, and their target was the Kree Empire, which was countless light years away. However, the first battle of the Avengers, and even for a long time afterward, their opponent was not the Kree Empire at all, but the powerful Thanos. It's just that the reason in between is the same, everyone's goal is for the Infinity Stones. Although Deputy Director Ross's refusal made Zhou Yang lose the opportunity to join the Avengers, standing by Deputy Director Ross's side allowed Zhou Yang to better avoid the Hydra crisis, which was actually a good thing for him. Whether the subsequent developments will be the same as in the original timeline depends on what Odin intends to do. Zhou Yang knew that many things would happen in the original timeline, but those things were just the most superficial. The magnificent struggle hidden beneath these superficial things was what he needed to handle carefully. Don't look at Zhou Yang's current strength being considerable, but even when facing a Hulk, he can only use deceptive methods to deal with him, let alone other more powerful enemies, Alien Chitauri, Ultron, Loki, and even Thanos behind the scenes. If his special identity is not considered, as an Earthling, his will is firm to resist, and even completely eliminate, these existences that want to destroy the Earth. Also, Ragnarok of Asgard will arrive in a few years, and Zhou Yang, who has already fallen into Odin's sight, will definitely not be able to escape. So, for now, Zhou Yang's most urgent priority is to strengthen his own strength. He must restore his power as a legendary magician on Earth. The simplest and most direct way to do this is to use the Infinity Stones. Only the Infinity Stones can break the influence of the inertia of Earth's magic element on him the fastest. But now, he doesn't even know where the cosmic cube is hidden. But this doesn't matter. Loki will come to Earth soon. Taking advantage of this opportunity, even if Zhou Yang cannot get the cosmic cube, he can find ways to seize Loki's Mind Stone, and this item is more suitable for magicians to use. As for the invitation in his hand, the Stark Expo, Zhou Yang should indeed go and see it. He shouldn't miss this excitement, and there might even be some benefits to be gained there. In fact, Tony Stark hasn't been so smooth during this time. After the preparatory meeting for the Stark Expo was just held a while ago, Tony Stark was subpoenaed by the American Congress, requiring him to attend a hearing, the purpose of which was to seize the Iron Man armor in his hands. But that hearing was destined to be a farce. Although many people coveted Stark's Iron Man armor technology, and even some of his business competitors were fanning the flames, there were more people standing on Stark's side. If someone invented a particularly useful technology, and the government seized this technology in the name of threatening national security, who could accept that? America is, after all, a capitalist country. The power of capital has permeated all aspects. When some people's selfish desires begin to affect the security of capital, capital will immediately counterattack, and the media is the first bullet they fire. After a hearing, almost all the media in America stood on Stark's side, mocking the senators and representatives, so much so that some people dared not accept media interviews for a short time. However, at this moment, a sudden change occurred. Stark had an accident during a race in Monaco, and Ivan Vanko appeared. Although the armor he wore was not a mature Iron Man armor, the basic concept was the same. This meant that with support, Ivan Vanko could quickly manufacture mature Iron Man armor. Regardless, Ivan Vanko's appearance directly changed the situation. By this time, the government no longer needed to forcibly seize Stark's Iron Man technology directly. They only needed to get Ivan Vanko, and they could quickly manufacture new Iron Man armor. This was also a big blow to Stark, especially regarding what happened back then, how Ivan Vanko's father, Anton Vanko, was expelled from America, whether Howard Stark forcibly seized his technology or the media's direction changed, and Stark was greatly affected, eventually even having an Iron Man armor driven away by his friend Colonel Rhodey. The United States military finally had its own Iron Man armor, and coupled with Justin Hammer's Hammer Industries also starting to manufacture new Iron Man armor with great fanfare, not only Tony Stark but also the entire Stark Industries began to enter a period of turmoil. However, judging from Joe Yang's contact with Tony Stark tonight, this guy didn't show any signs of decadence, and even looked calm and resolute. It seemed that he already had enough confidence to turn everything around. Superhero Group. Joe Yang was indeed very shocked when he heard this name. On the one hand, it was because the Avengers were about to appear and the impact they would have on the whole world, and on the other hand, it was because he knew that Stark being able to say the name Superhero Group indicated that he already knew that his father, Howard Stark, was a founding member of S.H.I.E.L.D., and that he would soon build the arc reactor with a new element. Perhaps it has already been built successfully. Joe Yang can only hope that Stark does not destroy the item his father left behind, otherwise, Joe Yang will have to go to the Stark Expo himself and find a way to figure it out. A new element created by imitating the cosmic cube was Howard Stark's idea, which was finally manufactured by Tony Stark. The technical barrier in between is far beyond what ordinary people can overcome, and even Joe Yang may not gain anything from Stark's new element. If he simply wanted to steal an arc reactor created by imitating the cosmic cube, that would be another matter. However, that item is not of much value to him, at most it only serves as an energy supply device. And what Joe Yang truly hopes to obtain are other things that can help him make greater progress in magic. The quiet street was sparsely populated, and in the middle of the day, indeed few people were willing to wander around the street. A bicycle came from afar at an extremely fast speed, and in the blink of an eye, it stopped at Daniel Joe's doorstep. He took off the blue and white cycling cap on his head, revealing a golden-haired Joe Yang. He had just rushed back from Imperial University. There are still a few days until the start of the semester, so the school has not yet arranged for new students to move in. Therefore, Joe Yang can only travel back and forth between the school and his apartment every day. However, the distance between the two is only 2 to 3 kilometers, and driving there would be a bit of a waste, so Joe Yang simply bikes back and forth. However, just as Joe Yang took off his hat, the door next door suddenly opened. Gwen Stacy, who seemed to have been waiting there for a long time, poked her head out and said to Joe Yang with a hint of nervousness, "Daniel, it seems you have guests at your house. They've been waiting there since this morning." Hearing Gwen Stacy say this, Joe Yang immediately understood the source of her nervousness. Although the situation has eased in recent days, and people seem to have completely forgotten what happened a few days ago, once strangers appear in their neighborhood, especially strangers with suspicious movements, they immediately become nervous. Especially the people at Joe Yang's doorstep. They have been waiting here since Reinhard left this morning. They didn't go to Imperial University to find him, nor did they leave. They just kept waiting here. Such strange behavior indeed made Gwen Stacy a bit nervous. However, it was also because these people didn't do anything, otherwise, Gwen Stacy would have called the police long ago. Joe Yang seemed to be shocked and trembled suddenly, then said equally nervously, "Really, Gwen, didn't you ask the police to check their identities?" Gwen Stacy's father is the local Chief Stacy. With just one phone call from her, many police officers would immediately rush over. Gwen Stacy looked at the two people getting out of the car in the distance, then said in a low voice, "My daddy said not to cause him trouble for no reason." Joe Yang nodded with a sudden realization. It seems Chief Stacy's family education is still very strict. The two people in black suits in the distance were already very close. Joe Yang gestured and nodded towards Gwen Stacy, who immediately carefully retreated, leaving only a crack in the door to listen to the movement outside. Mr. Daniel Zhou. The man in black seemed unsure of Zhou Yang's identity. Seeing him nod, he then handed over a business card and said very politely, "We are from a renovation company. We heard that you need to renovate here, so we came to talk to you." "Okay, please come in," Zhou Yang said while flipping through the business card in his hand, inviting the two people into the house. At the same time, he showed a relaxed smile to Gwen Stacy next door, while Gwen Stacy retreated into her house with a flushed face. It turns out they were just salesmen for renovations, but she had mistaken them for bad guys. For a moment, Gwen Stacy felt too embarrassed to face Zhou Yang. As soon as they entered the door, the expressions of the two men in black immediately became serious. The younger man in black said to the other man in black, "You guard the door, be careful and alert." The other man in black followed Zhou Yang into the living room, then lowered his voice and asked, "Mr. Reinhardt?" Zhou Yang's movements paused involuntarily. He looked up and carefully examined the face of the man in black, and finally said uncertainly, "You are from the Bakshi family." Hearing Zhou Yang say the name Bakshi, the man in black immediately breathed a sigh of relief and said, "Yes, sir, my name is Sunil Bakshi, and I am the third-generation heir of the Bakshi family." "Ah, the Bakshi family. I guess it's about time you came looking for me. Let's go, let's talk upstairs, it's safer there." Zhou Yang let out a long breath, his expression very complex. Werner Reinhardt was a name Zhou Yang once used. To be precise, it was the name this body used when he transmigrated to this world. This name once caused some waves during World War II, but eventually completely disappeared into history with the end of World War II. In the study on the second floor, the bookshelves were filled with books. However, all these books were available in the Imperial University Library. If you check Reinhardt's borrowing records at the Imperial University Library, you will find that all the books in the borrowing records are here. How did things go? Zhou Yang sat behind the desk, while Sunil Bakshi stood opposite him somewhat cautiously. According to the information passed down through the family, the person in front of him was already a high-ranking German officer during World War II and possessed powerful extraordinary abilities. After 60 or 70 years, he not only showed no signs of aging but seemed even younger than Sunil Bakshi himself. Sunil Bakshi's grandfather was Reinhardt's adjutant at that time. However, at the end of World War II, Reinhardt used various means to hide him in the Netherlands, which allowed him to survive the post-World War II purge of Germans. Thinking about the hardship faced by German citizens immediately after World War II, Bakshi couldn't help but shiver. Moreover, even today, if their identity as German descendants is exposed, there is a high possibility that they will be hunted by those Avengers. The hatred of the Jews for what happened back then has not been forgotten at all, even after half a century. Sunil Bakshi had known about his family's true identity since he was a child, which cultivated his good habit of speaking and acting cautiously. Reinhardt's sudden appearance did indeed cause some confusion within the family, especially since his grandfather, old Bakshi, had long since passed away. The family is now controlled by his father. After confirming that Reinhardt's code was correct, the family had an internal discussion and finally decided to first carry out Reinhardt's orders. After all, in this matter, they cannot take a single wrong step. Although the Bakshi family has been very low-key over the years, based on Reinhardt's orders back then, they have been paying close attention to the two forces Reinhardt left on Earth and have special connections with some people within these two forces. Therefore, although they cannot control these two forces, they have a good understanding of their whereabouts. Under normal circumstances, their family would not easily provoke these two forces. If it were at another time, even if Reinhardt returned, the first thing they would try to do would be to directly eliminate the trouble that is Reinhardt. However, times are different now, especially after Stark announced that he was Iron Man. Superheroes are constantly emerging all over the world. Coupled with the rumors their family had heard in the past, the entire extraordinary world has finally unveiled its veil before them. If Reinhardt truly possesses powerful strength as recorded in the family's documents, then even if their family wants to deal with him, they can only rely on the strength of others. Otherwise, it would be like an egg hitting a rock. And more importantly, if Reinhardt is indeed the person from back then he also knows the deepest secret of their family. Once he is angered and reveals the deepest secret of their family, the consequences will be unimaginable. What truly forced Sunil Bakshi to rush to America immediately was Reinhardt's battle with Abomination and Hulk in Manhattan. Others did not know the true identity of this suddenly appearing water giant, but their family members knew it better than anyone. Reinhardt showed his superhero strength that could contend with Hulk, which forced the Bakshi family to absolutely not act rashly. If they fail to subdue the tiger, they are very likely to be injured by it, and not just injured, but very likely completely destroyed. Therefore, Sunil Bakshi came here today to meet Reinhardt. On the one hand, he wanted to completely confirm his true identity, and on the other hand, he wanted to test his attitude towards the Bakshi family. If the other party is truly the person from back then his every move could bring the entire family to ruin. And now, Bakshi can basically confirm Reinhardt's true identity, because although the other party's appearance is quite different from back then and even has a trend of reverse growth, if you look closely, you will find that his eyes are always the same, especially his gaze. Although it looks calm, it seems as if the entire world is under his control. This kind of powerful confidence is not something ordinary people can possess. Many thoughts flashed through Sunil Bakshi's mind in a very short time. Only then did he say to Jo Young, "Rihanna." Jo Young waved his hand, interrupting Bakshi. "Call me Daniel. The name I'm using now is Daniel Joe. As for the name Reinhardt, let it completely disappear into history." Jo Yang's expression was somewhat complex. When he first came to this world back then, he even forgot his original name and had been using Reinhardt to refer to himself. Later, during those years in Jotunheim, his original self gradually returned, and he gradually forgot the name Reinhardt. And now, especially after returning to Earth, if the name Reinhardt were known to his enemies, it's possible that those enemies from back then would come knocking one after another. Just Nick Fury is enough for him to handle, not to mention Captain America Rogers and Wolverine Logan, etc. Fortunately, Wolverine Logan should have lost all his memories by now and shouldn't remember him. Poor Logan, his memory has been repeatedly wiped by people over the years, and he has been manipulated like a pawn. If he hadn't met Professor Charles, he probably wouldn't have been able to escape from that person's hands. Okay, Mr. Joe, Sunil Bakshi ultimately did not dare to be too presumptuous in front of Jo Young. After all, their family has always adhered to a strict and rigorous style, which has allowed them to overcome crisis after crisis. Getting down to business, Sunil Bakshi said with a serious expression, "First, Norwich Energy Group. Since World War II, Norwich Energy Group has relied on its close relationship with the Great Lakes Power Group to build hydroelectric power stations throughout America. Later, it began to get involved in oil, natural gas, nuclear power plants, and other energy industries, becoming a large energy group with a surface value of nearly $10 billion, and all of this is just what's visible." Jo Young nodded, saying calmly, "These were all business plans I made before I left. I just didn't expect the name Norwich Energy Group to still exist." Ailing doesn't seem to have gone too far. Yes, Ms. Ailing has been unmarried for decades. In the past 20 years, she has gradually started to delegate power, so now basically no one knows her exact situation. After a slight pause, Bakshi continued, "However, in recent years, Norwich Energy Group has gradually started to develop in many areas such as real estate, power, automobiles, and the internet, getting involved in politics, economy, and many other affairs, especially with the extraordinary world. They have had quite a bit of contact. This is what we need to overcome." Jo Young sighed heavily, because in this world, very few people know that Eileen Adler is actually a mutant, and even a comrade in arms with Wolverine Logan back then, but she was later captured by Jo Young. However, it is precisely because of this identity that Jo Young is at ease with her. Perhaps Eileen Adler is deeply involved with mutants, but she will not get involved with other more complex forces. All of this was within his calculations, so it is simply a matter of money. This is where the problem lies. We have very few people within Norwich Energy Group, and it would be quite troublesome to take over Norwich Energy Group through normal means. Moreover, they have complex relationships with political and business circles, which makes it even more difficult for us. Bakshi's face was extremely grim. That depends on the secret bases on Svalbard and January Mayan Islands. What we need to seize first are the secret bases. As long as we regain the secret bases, we can secretly control the energy group. As for the surface matters, there's no need to rush for now. Jo Young narrowed his eyes, and the figure of Nick Fury flashed through his mind. His current identity cannot be exposed, especially before the Hydra incident occurs, and possibly even until after the superhero civil war. "Can't you hurry up, Betty?" Jo Young shouted impatiently into the bedroom, and Betty Ross's perfunctory voice immediately came from inside, Okay, it'll be ready soon. Jo Young could only sigh heavily, then sat down on the sofa. It's always troublesome for women to put on makeup. They say they'll be quick, but they always make you wait for another hour or so. But then again, be content that you have a woman willing to get dressed up carefully and patiently just to go out with you. To be honest, if it weren't for the purpose of contacting some upper-class people this time, Jo Young wouldn't have come to Betty Ross. Even if he didn't go alone, he would have called his neighbor Gwen Stacy, who is also a young, beautiful girl, and the daughter of the New York Police Precinct Chief. However, when it comes to extensive social connections, Gwen is far inferior to Betty Ross in this regard. The people she knows and is familiar with are mostly second-generation individuals from wealthy merchant and politician families, but Betty Ross interacts with powerful women like Pepper Potts. Since Betty Ross won't be finished anytime soon, Jo Young can only ponder the plan he discussed with Sunil Bakshi a few days ago. The overall situation now is much better than Jo Young's initial expectations. Although Norwich Energy Company is no longer under his control, the company's development over the years has still been carried out in accordance with his development plan from back then, without deviating too much. The most crucial point is that although Ailing Adler gave up the position of CEO of the company, and the company has also cross-held shares with other energy groups over the years, the largest shareholder is still Ailing Adler, which means it is Jo Young. As long as he can sort out Ailing Adler, he can take back the entire energy company. What makes Jo Young most relieved is that the connection between the entire energy company and Hydra is not extensive. To say there is no connection at all is nonsense. Hydra would not let go of such a large piece of fatty meat. It's just that Ailing Adler doesn't know their true identity. This company has not developed into a world-class energy company, but its strength should not be underestimated. The most important thing is that its involvement with the dark side of this world is not extensive, which really made Jo Young breathe a sigh of relief. Whether it's Hydra, the Hand, or advanced idea mechanics, the ultimate goal these people pursue is to change the order of the entire world. Once it reaches that point, it will be very difficult for Jo Young to do anything, even if he wants to. Fortunately, since the energy company is not involved with Hydra, what Jo Young needs to do is to secretly take back control of it, and this involves the secret base in the Arctic. Over the years, the energy company has transferred many people from the secret base to be responsible for the company's security, resulting in not many people remaining at the entire secret base now. If it weren't for the most urgent and critical secrets still existing there, it's likely that place would have been abandoned long ago. But that's also good, because it is precisely because of this that Jo Young was able to regain control of the secret base without the energy company noticing. Now the Bakshi family has established contact with some personnel at the secret base and has already begun to privately contact some people in Reinhardt's name. When Jo Young appears, they can take back the entire secret base. This mainly depends on the timing. It is not suitable for Jo Young to leave New York immediately. After all, the United States military and SHIELD are still secretly watching him, and he himself has a lot of things to do in New York. In addition, there are economic matters, and the current Stark Expo is a good opportunity. Jo Young had Sunil Bakshi short Hammer Industries in the market in the name of Jo Young's Dutch family. To be honest, many people are actually very optimistic about Hammer Industries right now, especially with Stark's recent slump, Colonel Rhodes getting an Iron Man suit for the United States military, and Hammer Industries simultaneously developing a new set of Iron Man suits. This has made many people on Wall Street very optimistic about Hammer Industries, especially after tonight. Many people predict that Hammer Industries stock will experience explosive growth. However, Jo Young knows clearly that by tomorrow, Hammer Industries will only face destruction, while Stark Industries stock will soar. To be honest, if it weren't for the US stock market closing at 4 p.m., Jo Young would really want to do some extreme operations. When Justin Hammer showcases the super suits developed by Hammer Industries, if it were in real-time synchronization, Hammer Industries stock would likely reach its peak value. Shorting Hammer Industries at that time would yield the greatest gains. It's a pity that the Stark Expo is held at night. In fact, Jo Young has another way, which is to buy Stark Industries stock with all his might at this time. Then, by tomorrow, Stark Industries stock will also experience a surge, and his gains will definitely not be small at that time. However, Jo Young ultimately chose to short. Shorting is much more profitable than going long. What's more, after the stock settlement, he can also take the opportunity to buy Hammer Industries stock at the bottom and take control of Hammer Industries. At that time, whether it's splitting and restructuring or selling off all its assets, Jo-young can make a good profit. However, he is more inclined towards the former. Hammer Industries still has a certain value. If it can be split and then restructured into a new technology group based on it, it will be of great help to Reinhardt's plan. As for Stark Industries stock, playing with it for a short time is fine, but if you really want to do something through it, it's basically impossible. Pepper Potts being chosen by Tony Stark to become the CEO of Stark Industries proves that her own abilities should not be underestimated. Pepper Potts' financial support has been the most crucial factor in Stark's continuous large-scale investments in Iron Man suits for so many years. The fact that Stark Industries remained unscathed despite such massive fund movements is enough to demonstrate her strong capabilities. There will be a good show tonight. Jo-young has prepared everything he needs to. Unless Tony Stark is really unlucky enough to have an accident and die at the hands of Ivan Vanko, the situation will not completely change. However, this is basically unlikely to happen. Just from Jo-young's contact with Tony Stark that day, it can be seen that Tony Stark is fully prepared and is just waiting to dig a pit to bury his opponent. And even if something really happens, it won't have any impact on Jo-young's memory. It's enough that the robots developed by Ivan Vanko are not controlled by Justin Hammer. Even if Ivan Vanko has an accident, Tony Stark will not let Justin Hammer off the hook. So this is a sure win deal, and it is also an investment made by the family of Jo-young's public identity. This means that by tomorrow, his public identity will also become a billionaire. Of course, the public will basically not know about this. Even driving on the way to Flushing, Jo-young was still thinking about this matter. If an accident that even he cannot control truly occurs, to be honest, it might not be a bad thing. This indicates that the original timeline has been shaken, which will be more conducive for him to break free from Odin's control. Tonight, Betty Ross was wearing a light gray off-the-shoulder patterned long dress, looking exceptionally elegant. When she walked into the exhibition hall arm in arm with Jo-young, she attracted a lot of attention, and there was much discussion about Jo-young's identity. The Stark Expo attracted most of America's industrial and technology groups, including not only Hammer Industries, Osborne Technology, PIM Technologies, but also old established energy companies like Roxxon Oil, and many other top industrial and technology groups that Jo-young had never even heard of. Despite Tony Stark's recent unfavorable situation, this did not affect others' participation in this grand event. Jo-young followed Betty Ross and met many people along the way. However, for some reason, Pepper Potts never appeared. Perhaps she was behind the scenes discussing the plan's progress with Tony Stark, or perhaps she was completely unaware of everything. No, she couldn't be completely unaware. She is the person who understands Tony Stark the most. How could she not know Stark's current situation and his next actions? So, even if Stark didn't deliberately instruct anything, Pepper Potts would find ways to completely defeat Hammer Industries. Tonight's action is a full counterattack against Hammer Industries, and even a sharp counterattack against some people in the United States military and Congress who covet them. Only by taking down Hammer Industries can Stark Industries firmly remain at the forefront of the industry. Or perhaps, they also want to get a piece of the pie from the remains of Hammer Industries. At that time, everyone is likely to become competitors. While contemplating, Jo-young also entered the Hammer Industries exhibition hall. At this time, even though the exhibition had not officially started, the hall was already packed with people. "Sister Betty," a female voice suddenly sounded behind Jo-young and Betty Ross. Jo-young subconsciously turned around and saw that Betty Ross had already started chatting with a rebellious young girl who was 1.6 meters tall, wearing a light green long dress, gray-green long hair, and a nose ring. "It's you, Justina. Why are you here tonight? Does your father know?" Betty Ross's face was full of surprise. At the same time, she pulled Justina to her side and then looked around. "He's busy with his big business right now, he doesn't have time to care about me," Justina said, taking a lollipop out of her mouth, and then looked at Jo-young curiously and said, "Who is this?" "Your new boyfriend. His name is Daniel Joe, and he will be your junior soon. Daniel, let me introduce you. This is your senior, Justina from the second year, Justina Hammer. She is the daughter of Justin Hammer, the host here tonight." Saying this, Betty Ross gave Jo-young a subtle wink. Don't think she was completely unaware of Jo-young's intentions for coming here tonight. Her father, General Ross didn't hide anything from her about Joe Young receiving an invitation from Stark himself. Coupled with the fact that she knew Joe Young was a magician, she could guess what was going on. Hello, Senior Justina. We are here tonight to admire the latest products developed by Hammer Industries. If they can really replace Iron Man, then the market value of the entire Hammer Industries will likely soar to the sky, Joe Young said with a smile, looking unreserved. Justina stared at Joe Young for a moment, then looked at Betty Ross, and said very directly, Sister Betty, why did you find such a guy? He's so old-fashioned, like an old man, so boring. I already said, he is my student. Betty Ross quickly waved her hand, trying to distance herself from Joe Young. A student who hasn't registered at school yet, right, Sister Betty? Justina looked at Betty Ross with a teasing expression. Her meaning was clear. Joe Young hasn't entered school yet, but Betty Ross has already said he is her student. Justina's eyes rolled, and then she quickly said, It's okay, Sister Betty, he won't be enrolling for a few more days anyway. It's fine even if you publicly announce that he is your boyfriend right now. You can just announce your breakup after he enrolls. No matter where, a romantic relationship between a student and a teacher is a taboo. Even though such things happen in many schools, they can never be brought out into the open. Since Joe Young is not yet a student of Imperial University, his relationship with Betty Ross has no impact whatsoever. Okay, let's not talk about this anymore, your father is about to make his appearance. As Betty Ross spoke, all the lights in the exhibition hall suddenly dimmed. Everyone knew that the main event of the night was about to begin. Sometimes you have to admit, Justin Hammer's abilities are quite outstanding. Although the rise of Hammer Industries was after Stark voluntarily announced his withdrawal from the arms industry, his ability to seize this opportunity and become the main military contractor for the United States military shows his vision and methods are quite remarkable. Most importantly, he is thick-skinned enough. Regarding Tony Stark's strengths, he can humbly learn and then try his best to imitate them. Under the brilliant lights, Justin Hammer, dressed in a high-end, sharp suit, made a dazzling appearance. To the sound of exciting music, he walked with comical tap dance steps towards the elites from various fields present, including many companies, media, and investors, and then began his performance for the evening. Aside from not having a bunch of bikini-clad beauties on stage, Justin Hammer's routine was no different from the flashy tricks Tony Stark used. And honestly, Justin Hammer really wanted to do that, but after all, Hammer Industries is now the main military contractor for the United States military, especially with many generals from the Department of Defense sitting below. They still needed to save face in this regard. Soon, Justin Hammer unveiled Hammer Industries' highly distinctive Tri-Service Steel Soldiers team. With great excitement, he grandly introduced to everyone present the most successful super steel soldier they had jointly created with the United States military, War Machine Colonel Rhodes. The powerful and robust War Machine, coupled with the entire row of steel team members whose movements were perfectly synchronized, made everyone present cheer uncontrollably. Especially the United States military generals. After War Machine Colonel Rhodes appeared, they also nodded repeatedly with great satisfaction. Your father is truly a smart person, Joe Young suddenly whispered into Justina Hammer's ear, making her ask with some confusion, why? Is there something wrong here? Your reaction is very quick. Shouldn't a normal person say thank you? Joe Young looked at Justina Hammer with surprise. Although this young girl looked like a delinquent, she was very perceptive about everything around her. It's your tone that's wrong. You're not sincerely praising him, and based on what I know about him, he doesn't deserve such praise from others, Justina Hammer said, suddenly lowering her voice. This made Reinhardt seem to understand something. Continuing to talk about this at this moment was not a good idea, so he decisively changed the subject and said, have you noticed that the helmets of those steel soldiers behind are more than one size smaller than the War Machine's helmet? That means a normal person simply cannot fit into them. You mean those are machines? Justina Hammer almost cried out in surprise. She was also a top student from Imperial College London and naturally understood some taboo issues between science and ethics, such as cloning technology and robot intelligence and weaponization. These were all very sensitive things, but she never expected that her own father would dare to deceive people with a group of armed robots. In this era of highly developed science and technology, all countries possess powerful hacking capabilities. If you don't have a sufficient firewall system, the armed robots you worked so hard to build are very likely to be taken over by others in the shortest possible time and then turn around and attack you. Such armed robots had been proposed before, but all were completely stifled just as they were reaching the final step. Of course, the technical difficulty of armed robots is much lower than that of steel armor controlled by humans, especially when armed robots do not require independent intelligence. Whether it's cost, manufacturing time, or maintenance, they are relatively much cheaper. And Joe Young now knew that although Justin Hammer seemed to be in charge of everything, the one actually controlling it all was Ivan Vanko, who was hidden behind the scenes. What he was truly waiting for was Tony Stark, who was about to arrive. This was a confrontation between the two of them. Joe Young had no interest in the battle between the two of them. What he was truly interested in was where the real power of the steel soldiers developed by Ivan Vanko lay. Joe Young might possibly obtain Stark's imitation cosmic cube particle arc reactor in the future, but this absolutely could not be known to Stark. Therefore, he needed to put on a Hammer Industries facade to avoid unnecessary trouble. Ivan Vanko, nicknamed Whiplash, was one of the few ordinary humans in the entire Marvel Universe capable of directly confronting Tony Stark. Even after Stark developed the imitation cosmic cube particle arc reactor, he still needed to team up with War Machine Colonel Rhodes to finally resolve the trouble with Ivan Vanko. From this, it can be seen that Ivan Vanko's development of the steel soldiers was not as weak as it appeared. So where are its advantages, the advantages that Joe Young could still learn from it even after it became Stark's defeated opponent? The steel soldiers on stage looked menacing, but their weakness in control already made them appear very vulnerable. However, their advantage in numbers and cost certainly made them very popular with the United States military. As for their combined combat capability, if you consider them fighting against anyone other than Tony Stark, they might actually show considerable strength. But facing Stark, they would reveal deficiencies in many aspects and be crushed in minutes. Especially with Jarvis, if Stark ordered Jarvis to fully invade the control systems of these steel soldiers, then these steel soldiers would immediately become Stark's pawns. Therefore, what these steel soldiers lack most is an intelligent system like Jarvis. If they had such an intelligent system, they might be able to exert power like Ultron. But before such an intelligent system is developed, this type of unmanned remote-controlled steel soldier is not worth pursuing. Instead of investing funds in them like this, it would be better to put it into drones. Small drones are harder to track and have full killing power. Ivan Vanko is just a person after all. No matter how smart he is, his computing power is far inferior to superintelligence. As Joe Young thought of this, a low alarm sounded. High above in the distance, a brilliant light flashed, accompanied by the sound of tearing through the air, rapidly flying from afar. In the blink of an eye, Iron Man, wearing golden red steel armor, fell directly down and landed on the stage with extraordinary steadiness. The sudden arrival of Iron Man immediately drew whistles and applause from the audience who were eager to watch the show. Especially when Stark deliberately stood next to War Machine Colonel Rhodes and waved to the crowd, showing unity. Even those United States military figures who had always disliked him couldn't help but applaud. If Iron Man and War Machine could team up, plus Hammer Industries, then America wouldn't be far from dominating the globe. Of course, in the world of ordinary people, America was already the world hegemon, but in the supernatural domain, Americans were just getting started. At this moment, Joe Young's gaze had already fallen upon the triangular arc reactor on the chest of Stark's steel armor. That was the new element created by imitating the particle structure of the cosmic cube. The new substance created from such a new element, the arc reactor powered by this new substance containing immense energy, was the most powerful thing created by all of humanity on Earth. Reinhardt attempted to remotely analyze the elemental composition of this new substance using his mental power. However, as soon as his mental power approached, Stark's chest erupted with a brilliant light, frightening him into immediately retracting his mental power. The immense energy contained within the new arc reactor was far beyond what Reinhardt could currently reach. That sheer amount of energy alone was enough to propel Stark into the ranks of the most powerful individuals on the entire planet. No wonder Stark was later able to single-handedly contend with Thanos. Although there were many other influencing factors, the arc reactor created from this new element alone accounted for 70% of the factors. If this element could be applied to magic, even without obtaining the cosmic cube, Reinhardt's strength could be greatly enhanced. So now, how exactly could he get his hands on this? Forcing his way into Stark's residence was clearly not advisable. The invisibility he could currently cast was merely a distortion of light and could not eliminate all factors of his existence on this planet, so it would be very difficult to completely avoid Jarvis. Unless he could return to the realm of a legendary magician, but now he was hoping to break through to the legendary magician realm using the new element before him, which had become a vicious cycle. There was only one such arc reactor in this world so far. Even Colonel Rhodes, as Stark's closest friend, only used a secondary arc reactor, which simply could not compare to the new arc reactor. Ivan Vanko probably lost at this level as well. He painstakingly tried to build steel armor more powerful than Stark's, but he didn't expect that the other party had directly upgraded their power source, causing all defense and attack systems to be upgraded. It would have been strange if he had won. Tony Stark, or rather Howard Stark, had indeed researched some things during the years the Cosmic Cube was in his hands. Wait, Howard Stark, industrial models, industrial parks. Joe Young seemed to have thought of something, and his eyes lit up. And just at this moment, faint sounds of argument from the exhibition stage reached Joe Yang's ears. Justina Hammer, who was nearby, also seemed to become anxious. Although she didn't get along well with her father, she didn't want to see him bullied by Tony Stark. And just as the people below the stage began to whisper, the War Machine's weapons on the stage suddenly activated and immediately aimed at Tony Stark. Simultaneously, all the steel soldiers on the stage also acted. Their weapon systems suddenly activated at the same time, aiming at Tony Stark while also pointing towards the ordinary people below the stage. The United States military generals were the first to keenly sense that something was wrong. However, before they could speak, the weapons of all the steel units on the stage suddenly opened fire. Fortunately, Stark detected the anomaly one step ahead and flew up into the sky in an instant, thereby luring the weapons of these steel soldiers to raise their heads upwards at the same time, fiercely attacking Stark. Da da da. Countless piercing gunshots made people feel as if they were on a battlefield for a moment. And those bullets hitting the glass windows at the top of the exhibition hall directly shattered the high-strength glass. Countless fragments scattered, and the entire exhibition hall instantly turned into chaos. Don't go. Get out of here first. Joe Young grabbed Justina, who was trying to find Justin Hammer, and roared in a low voice, "Going now will only cause more trouble, you'll only be a hindrance. If you understand, come with us." Having said that, Joe Young no longer paid attention to Justina, pulled Betty Ross directly into his arms, and quickly left the exhibition hall. Justina bit her lip slightly, but then rushed out of the exhibition hall together with Joe Young. In this chaotic situation, only Joe Young could successfully lead people out of the exhibition hall. And at this moment, Joe Young also spotted Justin Hammer rushing towards the backstage, as well as Pepper Potts, who was looking to settle accounts with him. Of course, Black Widow Natasha Romanoff, who was right beside her, was also there. It was Joe Yang's first time seeing her. After all, she was still a young girl during World War II, whereas the Black Widow of that era had some cooperation with Joe Young. Joe Young quickly rushed out of the exhibition hall and got Betty Ross and Justina into a car in the shortest possible time. As for himself, he disappeared in the blink of an eye. I hope everyone will support it and subscribe for more videos.